Right now, what you are taking is a live look outside of Washington, D.C. On your left, the steps of the Capitol building and the lawn that surrounds it. 200,000 American flags have been put out in essence remembrance of the people who wouldn't be able to be here today because of the virtual ceremony and those who have lost their lives due to war and coronavirus. On the right-hand side, another view of the Capitol building, this time from above. You see the streets lined up with police, would be lined up with people. This year, not so much due to the coronavirus pandemic and other things of that nature. I'm going to flip another feed here for you as we continue along on our coverage. Take a look at this. Back on the left-hand side, you see this is where the president-elect of the United States will be coming out of for the inauguration ceremony. He will make his way down the steps of the Capitol building and onto that podium where he will accept the nomination for President of the United States. Normally, the current president would also be with him, but that is not the case this year. Current President Donald Trump has already departed for Florida. Well, he will not attend the inauguration ceremony on this Wednesday, January 20th. And with that, everyone, we say good morning. Isaac Petcash here for Erie News Now at the alert desk for our live inauguration coverage on this Wednesday, January 20th of 2021. 2020 had been a tumultuous year for so many. We know how difficult it was, whether you're a business owner, whether you're somebody who was out of work, whether you're somebody who lost a loved one tragically due to COVID-19. And this inauguration, for many, they believe resembles the changing of the guard, not just for the president, but potentially for the United States, and potentially bringing the country back together in the four main categories that President-elect Biden said was hurting the country at this point. But today, we focus solely on the inauguration ceremony. Over the course of the next 3 hours here on ENN+, as well as other entities on our newscast, on air, online, ENN+, we're going to bring you live coverage of the inauguration. We're going to sit down with Jeff Bloodworth, a professor at Gannon University. He's going to talk to us just about how he thinks the presidency for Donald Trump went, the inauguration process, and what we can expect with the Biden administration moving forward. We're also going to be talking to some other people as well. County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper is going to join us today with our Lisa Adams. She's going to be explaining the state of where Erie County is at right now and her thoughts on the inauguration, her thoughts on everything that's going on right now around Washington, D.C., and how this administration might be able to rectify that here today. We're also going to be talking, just as a crosstalk, just about what we can expect today to be. So the inauguration happens at noon, but what happens afterwards? How many things will Joe Biden plan on signing today? How many rules, how many proclamations, how many declarations will he make on this inauguration? And what will his speech sound like? What message will he convey to the entire nation and the entire world who's watching this inauguration with open ears and open eyes? Several countries that are fans of the U.S. and several countries who are not. Across the day, too, we're going to be taking a look at live views here. Of course, this one predominantly of the Capitol building. We'll show you in just a second. Just a lot of difference of what an inauguration would normally look like. You see there the American flags being planted. This is kind of a double combination of flags, if you will. The first is obviously to commemorate the people who have lost their lives due to COVID-19, a sheer number of deaths happening across the country, across the world due to this global pandemic that has hurt everyone in some capacity between 2020 and 2021. But it's also for the people who, cannot be at the inauguration today due to a virtual / watered down ceremony that would normally take place. Normally you would see people lining up on the streets. I'll take this bug down for just a second here. You can see all the flags lining up back for miles and miles and miles. People who would normally be standing shoulder to shoulder to watch the incoming president being sworn in. That, of course, this year not going to be the case as we continue to see social distancing measures being incorporated by the Biden administration due to COVID-19. So that's why this inauguration is so markedly different. Another reason why this inauguration is markedly different is because of the people who are not going to be attending. Critical leaders, House Minority Leader, as well as Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, will not be attending the inauguration today, though they had been invited, according to reports from their spokespeople. Vice President Mike Pence will be attending the inauguration, as he gave out a message last night talking about how he was thankful for getting to serve the country for 4 years. Who knows what the future for Mike Pence is going to be in politics, but he will no longer be the vice president after today. But the person, of course, that is the most critical that will not be there is President Donald Trump. He has already departed Andrews Air Force Base. He has left to head back to Mar-A-Lago, Florida, his resort there in Florida. He will not be attending the inauguration, and he's just the fourth president to do so. In fact, he's the last president that didn't resign to not attend the inauguration since Andrew Johnson in 1869. Johnson did not attend the inauguration ceremony of Ulysses S. Grant. That was back in 1869. Other presidents that did not attend the inauguration of their successors: John Quincy Adams did not attend Andrew Jackson's in 1829. John Adams Sr. did not attend the inauguration of Thomas Jefferson in 1801. Richard Nixon also did not attend the inauguration of Gerald Ford, although, of course, Nixon resigned in the middle of his second term back in August of 1974. So President Trump becomes just the fourth sitting president that did not resign to not attend the inauguration ceremony of his successor. But earlier today, President Trump did issue a couple of declarations, if you will. He also made a speech to some of his supporters as he left the White House for the last time and moved over to Andrews Air Force Base and then back to Mar-a-Lago, Florida. Here's some video of that happening today. You can see the president leaving his White House post that he's been at for the last 4 years. Him and his wife, Melania Trump, the former First Lady, as of noon today, climbing aboard that chopper where they left to go to Andrews Air Force Base. You can see the president saying goodbye one more time. Now, there was a crowd of media personnel around President Trump. They tried to ask him questions such as, do you regret anything in your presidency? What do you want to do moving forward? The president did not answer any of those questions. You see the chopper taking off. And again, this is something that normally happens as a formality, something that would happen just after the inauguration. You'd see the president walk over with the former president. They would go up to the top of the steps of the White House, and then the former president would depart. But of course, this happening a little bit earlier than expected. Now, President Trump also did make remarks once he got to Andrews Air Force Base. We'll hear those in just a second from him. As you can see, here are his remarks.
This has been an incredible 4 years. We've accomplished so much together. I want to thank all of my family and my friends and my staff and so many other people for being here. I want to thank you for your effort, your hard work. People have no idea how hard this family worked. They worked, and they worked for you. They could have had a much easier life, but they did a fantastic job. I just want to thank all of you, everyone. I want to thank Mark Meadows, who's here, someplace right there. I want to thank Mark. But it's been something very special. We've accomplished a lot. Our First Lady has been a woman of great grace and beauty and dignity. And so popular with the people, so popular with the people. In fact, honey, would you like to say a few words, please?
Being your First Lady was my greatest honor. Thank you for your love and your support. You will be in my thoughts and prayers. God bless you all. God bless your families. And God bless this beautiful nation. Thank you.
What else has to be said, right? But what we've done, that's true, honey, great job. What we've done has been amazing by any standard. We rebuilt the United States military.
My apologies there. I was chatting in with our Matt Knadler. He's going to be joining us in a couple of hours here from Washington, D.C. There you take a look at the Capitol building straight on, where the ceremonies are almost set to begin. Just about an hour from now, the inauguration ceremonies will begin. President-elect Biden will be sworn in at that point in time, and we will have the 46th President of the United States. Let me give you a look now What we're seeing at the moment, it was just up there for a second. It's a video coverage, if you will. There was coverage, as we saw, of President-elect being driven to the site of the inauguration ceremony. President-elect Biden attended what is normally a formality, a mass, just across from the White House before he came to this inauguration ceremony. So you can see his convoy there. We imagine that those cars right there, those bulletproof cars, are part of Joe Biden's caravan. He will be getting out of the limo and then walking up to what will be his home for the next 4 years at least as we move along here. So we'll take a live look at that right now. Again, you're watching coverage of the inauguration ceremony here. We appreciate you being with us here on Erie News Now. A lot of things to get to today, of course, as we continue along. All of this is live, by the way. I took out that live bug. We do want to give you an idea of just what today is. So the inauguration on January 20th. Just a bit of a background of how we got here. Of course, everybody in America, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, has been watching this election with open eyes and open ears. There you see the president-elect right now about to exit the vehicle, members of the Secret Service. There is the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. She will become the first woman to be sworn in as a vice president in the history of the country. Certainly a historical marker there. And there is the man who will, in about 2 hours, be the next president of the U.S., Joseph Biden, running a campaign in which many people didn't think he'd even get to this point. No one believed that Biden would be one of the nominees for the Democratic Party. He actually was falling a little bit in the primaries in the early portion. The leaders in that race early on in the Democratic primary, Bernie Sanders, the senator from Vermont. Kamala Harris herself also ran in the presidential race. She had a bit of a lead early. If you remember Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, she was in the running early on, had a bit of a lead, and just wasn't able to hold on. And it eventually got down to Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. And at that point, Biden had enough votes to claim the nomination for the Democratic nominee. So there you see Harris and family, Joe Biden and soon-to-be First Lady Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, making their way up to the front steps in what is truly a historic moment for the country, the 46th president being sworn in. Just a bit of a background of how this race went as we moved through the national vote. Of course, Joe Biden taking the Democratic nomination. President Trump, the Republican incumbent, easily won his nomination for his party. This is an election in which Joe Biden was favored to win the entire time, but no one really felt that that was going to be a landslide victory. Biden had leads in states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, states that the president had won 4 years ago. Of course, election night ended up turning into election marathon. It was a 3-day election process. We started on a Tuesday night, went all the way through Saturday, and that is when there was finally the call for the state of Pennsylvania, the call for the state of Michigan, and that is when President-elect Biden was officially named as President-elect Biden. So walking up the steps of the White House and the Capitol building here, the two are at the moment getting set to be sworn in. See on the right-hand side there, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. McConnell will also have a name change here in the next couple of days. He'll soon be Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, because Kamala Harris will end up being the tie-breaking vote in the Senate. If you remember a bit of a shock in the Senate race a couple of weeks ago, Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff both winning their Senate runoffs in the state of Georgia. They beat David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, two incumbent Republicans, in shocking race wins. And that got the Senate to 50-50. And because of that, of course, in the Senate, if there's a 50-50 split, the vice president becomes the tie-breaking vote if there is a down-the-middle split. So Kamala Harris making it 51-50. That would give her the ability to swing some Senate majorities in the favor of Democrats. So you can see the president-elect and vice president-elect walking through. There you see Kamala Harris walking through, and The processional behind them will follow shortly. There's the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. One of the instrumental parts in getting that new stimulus package done at the end of December. And so now we sit and now we wait for the inauguration ceremony to begin. Again, want to welcome you into the Alert Desk. Isaac Pekyash here. We appreciate you watching our coverage of the inauguration here on Erie News Now, the 46th president being sworn in. Going back to the race and how everything was run, of course, this election was happening during a global pandemic. A lot of people saying the reason President Trump lost the election was because of his handling of the pandemic. But really, this election cycle has been unlike no other. I know everybody says that all the time, right? This is a historic election. We've never seen anything like this before. But this was really the case. It was really just in part of a pandemic putting a damper on what normally would happen during an election. President Donald Trump, of course, still held lots of rallies. He had one here in Erie, in fact, at the end of October, right before the presidential election took place. But it was a subdued sort of a campaign for both candidates, both Biden and Trump. Trump not holding as many rallies as you normally expect him to hold. President-elect Biden, at that point, holding some rallies. A lot of them, though, were drive-in rallies where you'd take your car and you'd park it and you'd sit in your car with a mask on and you'd hear him speak. And it was more honking of the horns than it was clapping of the hands for Biden. Biden also, too, made a stop in Erie before President Trump did. And you could tell Erie was a big place for this election in terms of how critical it was for both candidates to win. We saw Dr. Jill Biden in Erie. We saw Joe Biden in Erie. We saw on the Trump campaign side, Donald Trump, Vice President Mike Pence. Donald Trump's son, Eric Trump, was in Erie twice. So the criticalness of a place like Erie, a swing county in a swing state, both candidates knew how important it was to be able to win that seat and to win those 20 electoral votes. And of course, we saw on election night, Pennsylvania so close. We saw the president hold a lead of over 700,000 votes at the end of election night. But with the mail-in ballots having to still be counted, we saw Biden slowly close in on that Trump lead and then eventually on Friday night take over the lead in Pennsylvania. He ended up winning that state by a few 10,000 votes. And that allowed Biden to go over the top and claim the race after winning Pennsylvania and after winning Georgia. There you see the military band prepping. There's Senator Mitt Romney. He was in this presidential race in 2012, ended up falling to President Barack Obama, but has since been a senator and was one of the ones who was for impeachment of Donald Trump. So you take a look at just the people who maybe have turned against the president in the final days of his presidency. Mitt Romney was certainly one of those as well. One of the people who were not in favor of President Trump. I believe on the right-hand side there you can see Senator from Missouri Josh Hawley. He's been the center of confrontation in the last couple of weeks. If you remember, Hawley was the first member of Congress on either side of either chamber that said he would appeal the election results. At that point, there was a significant amount of confrontation between Democrats and Republicans. The election certification, which took place on January 6th, certainly took some time, and it, in essence, was a back and forth, something we had really never seen before. Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, he also attending the inauguration. So you see a good amount of Republicans still at this inaugural ceremony, and just looking on to see what will happen now in the Biden administration. So if we take a look at exactly what's going to happen here as we get through the inauguration ceremony, let's set the scene for you. You see members of offices in the Senate and the House moving forward. The Speaker of the House, of course, will be there. Several other members of Congress. What will happen here is just the swearing-in ceremonies for the people who need to be sworn into new positions. And then we'll have the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris come out. She will give the oath of office for the Vice President. And then President-elect Joe Biden will give the oath of office for President around noon Eastern. And at that point, we will have the official changing of the guard, if you will, from President Trump to President Biden. Such a different scene on Capitol Hill this morning. Normally the chairs would be filled, the streets lined up, Pennsylvania Avenue bombarded with supporters and people just interested in watching the inauguration. But of course, as we know, this election cycle has been markedly different. Joe Biden winning the Electoral College, claiming 306 electoral votes. And the importance of the election in 2020 here was going to come down to who would win the swing states. Joe Biden ended up claiming the presidency really for winning the states that President Trump won back in 2016 as a surprise. Joe Biden winning the state of Georgia, something a Democrat hasn't won in a significant amount of time. Bill Clinton, the last person who won the state of Georgia on the Democratic side. But Biden also winning the Rust Belt states, the states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Those a combined total of 46 electoral votes. Those were the keys to him ending up winning the presidency. And from there, it was just a matter of claiming the states that Hillary Clinton was able to win in 2016, even though she lost the election. Here comes the caravan. You see continued march of congressional leaders, cabinet members, leaders from the White House, leaders from the House and the Senate, all making their way to their seats for the inaugural ceremony. And of course, as we take a look now on Capitol Hill, I do want to remind you, you take a look at those American flags, and you might wonder, why in the world are these American flags here? Well, as we've told you, the flags here are to represent two purposes. Number one, to represent the people that cannot be at the inauguration because of the virtual ceremony. But number two, they're put out to remember the people who have lost their lives due to COVID-19 and just the difficulty that the entire world has had during the pandemic. All right, we're going to get Jeff Bloodworth, a political expert from Gannon University, in just a second. Before we get to that, though, we want to show you some video earlier today of the president-elect going into a mass, as is customary for several president-elects. You can see him, Dr. Jill Biden, on the left-hand side there. A prayer service being held before the inauguration ceremony. It's normally a customary for incoming presidents. So Joe Biden, what's he thinking? What's going through his mind right now? That is the big question. And what will he be doing today as we get ready for the 46th president to be sworn in? So just a lot of stuff that has to happen today, a lot of formalities, things that are normal when it comes to inaugurating a president. And you just think about the back and forth that we've had with the changing of the guard in terms of the parties that have won the presidential seat since the year 2000, when George Bush won that ever so close election over Al Gore. It's been a lot of incumbents winning re-election. Bill Clinton getting there, President George Bush winning re-election, and then it was Obama for 8 years. Things swinging back to the Democrats, President Trump winning in 2016 with things going back to the Republicans. And then in 2020, another changing of the guard back to the Democrats with Joe Biden. And it will be interesting as well to see how things play out in Congress with the Democrats owning all three chambers now, as we await to see how the Congressional Congress will work in 2021. And with that, we want to say hello to Dr. Jeff Bloodworth. He is a professor and a political expert at Gannon University. Jeff, you got to reminisce back on 2 or 3 months ago. You and I were sitting at this desk on election night for what seems like 37 hours. We were talking about the possibilities. What if? What if this happens? What if this? What states could turn what color? And it all culminated to this moment. I just want to get your thoughts on what's happened from election night until now, and just the craziness that's happened in Washington, D.C., the turmoil that we've seen over the last few days. Of course, President Trump, members of his cabinet resigning, members of Congress saying that they, in essence, were stepping aside from him. And just your reaction on it. If you wouldn't mind just taking that mic and pinning it to your jacket here. Or maybe there is no pin.
Yeah, there's no pin.
There's no pin. Okay, I'm going to get Jeff a different mic here. This is what happens, folks. Live TV, the pin for his mic doesn't work, so we're going to get him another one. So we're going to go ahead and give him this mic now, and he can take that one off. And, yeah, I mean, just what we were talking about here, and just the fact that there was really an understanding by a lot of people that there was going to be this changing of the guard, but I just want to get your reaction to exactly what your thoughts are from November 3rd, election night, until January 20th here.
Well, it feels like there's been a whole nother, presidential term in between Election Day and inauguration. And look, what's happened over the past 2 months is really a microcosm of the president's first term in office and his campaign for president, where it's been a lot of chaos, a lot of tumult, a lot of ferment. But at the end of the day, the institutions held, and there was if not a peaceful, there was a transition of power.
Let's go ahead and go through exactly what happens today with the inauguration. Of course, everyone looks at the swearing in of the vice president-elect, the swearing in of the president-elect, but there's a lot more that happens on inauguration day that people don't necessarily know about. So let's just take us through the process of what we're going to see here in the next couple of hours, and then we'll get to what happens after.
Kind of leading up to the swearing in, or just including the swearing in?
Leading up and including the swearing in.
Well, this is going to look very different when if you're looking out from the stage onto the crowd. But if you're just watching this on television and looking at the at the staging itself, they're going to be it will look somewhat familiar, right? There's going to be dignitaries. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court will be there to oversee the swearing in of the president. There will be former presidents, probably not all. So that will look somewhat familiar. Behind the scenes, the new administration is busily, trying to kind of assume office. There are going to be plans for, the Senate to confirm members of the cabinet. There's going to be, the executive orders are being prepared right now so that upon inauguration, there are going to be reversals of Trump-era executive orders. I mean, there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes machineries of government that are being put in place so that once the new president is sworn in, we're going to see policy changes and policy realities almost immediately.
Let's talk a little bit about those policies that we expect to put in. A lot of financial executive orders, one being the extension of the eviction moratorium we expect through the month of at least March. Give us an insight of what you expect the president-elect, which will be president, to sign throughout the day today here that could make an impact on people in our area.
Well, I think student loan payment relief is going to be already been announced. As you said, eviction notifications, right, or a moratorium on those. I mean, I think a lot of the executive orders that are going to be forthcoming, probably rejoining Paris Climate Accords, a lot of those executive orders here in Northwest Pennsylvania, or for most Americans, these are not things that are going to be kind of affecting us on a day-to-day basis. I mean, these are kind of long-term, kind of far away important steps. The stuff that's going to really impact our day-to-day lives are going to be a vaccine rollout, which the Biden administration is going to take a much more hands-on approach to. And I think, the president's $1.9 trillion proposed budget plan and stimulus package. I mean, those are the two large ticket items that 2 to 3 months from now, you could argue, if done well, will make life seem quite different for millions of Americans.
We know this inauguration ceremony is different for several reasons. The number one, of course, being the global pandemic. Many people who would normally be lining up shoulder to shoulder to attend won't be. It's going to be relatively small, watered down, a lot of it virtual. That's why we're giving you coverage here on Erie News Now. But the biggest part I think a lot of people are understanding is not the people who are there, but the people who aren't there. And we start with President Trump. We saw him leave earlier today to go back to Mar-A-Lago, his resort in Florida. Just your thoughts, and again, Your thoughts as a president for the first time since Andrew Johnson does not attend the inauguration ceremony. Just your thoughts on that and exactly what you thought when you saw him leaving in the chopper today at 8 o'clock this morning.
Well, it's not a good look. Let's start with that. It makes him look like a sore loser. And let's just be honest. He is a sore loser. But at the same time, I mean, what so many people in 2016 said about Trump, he's unprecedented. We haven't seen this before. I mean, as a historian, there are precedents for this, right? I mean, President Trump in many ways, and our current political hyper-partisan atmosphere, is a return to the 19th century. Andrew Johnson, right, was impeached, not convicted. Sound familiar? Didn't attend his own inaugural. I mean, so in the 19th century, and again, that was a long time ago. We can find kind of examples of presidential behavior that fit the Trump mold. I'm neither saying it's good or bad. It just is. It's not the best look politically. I would argue. But in many ways, it's a reflection of the hyper-partisan times we live in.
And as we also look at the other staff, in essence, that is going to be there, your thoughts on Mike Pence choosing to attend the inauguration? We almost saw a bit of a split from the president and the vice president. Mike Pence, of course, came out and said he was still supportive of Trump and the things that he believed in. But it's almost as if we saw a division between the own top two members of the United States in terms of power. And I'm going to ask you a question off of that in a second, but just your thoughts on Mike Pence choosing to attend the inauguration.
I mean, look, there is a break between Trump and Pence. Pence does no longer belongs in the Trump orbit. It's only going to become more pronounced and more bitter as the days and weeks and years go by. Pence was always an establishment figure of the Republican Party on the right wing of the Republican Party, more conservative than your average Republican, but still an establishment figure. I'm not surprised. I mean, Mike Pence always was a bizarre fit for Donald Trump's world. I mean, he's a conservative Christian, largely seen as quite honest. The president's critics are not fans of Vice President Pence. This was predictable, and I suspect it's only going to become more ugly as the years go by.
My question off of that, too, is part of the reason we're seeing Pence attend the inauguration is because of the potential to him wanting to save his political career. Do we see Mike Pence potentially run for office in the future? And if so, is that a big reason why he's attending today?
Look, he got the worst of both worlds, and that by refusing to sign on to the president's illegal, unconstitutional scheme to declare him victor on January 6th, and refusing to sign up onto that, he lost large swaths of the president's supporters. But at the same time, being such a loyal vice president for President Trump made him persona non grata to the anti-Trump conservative world, okay? Much less, Democrats. And so let's imagine Vice President Pence runs, for, the Senate or even the presidency in 2024. Anti-Trump conservatives won't cotton to him. And the Trump wing of the party is going to have very hard feelings against him. I suspect he knows that he's never going to run for office again. I suspect he thinks and he did do the right thing on January 6th. He has been a figure of unity from the Trump administration, the sole figure of unity from the Trump administration. And he salvaged his historical reputation. I think he's, who knows what his future is going to be, but I very much doubt it's in elective politics.
As of right now, President-elect Joe Biden, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris are in the building. We see right there the former president, the second to last president of the U.S., President Barack Obama, with his wife Michelle Obama. They were the last Democratic president in office before Donald Trump was sworn in in 2016. A stark difference of what President Trump is doing today. We saw Obama attend the inauguration. We saw him do his best to make amends with and make the transition as easy as possible. We're also getting note as well that the president has left a note on his desk for the incoming president-elect. We've had reports from NBC News and CBS News that has happened. We'll have to see if anything of that note comes out. But, Jeff, let's go ahead and go back to this election cycle. And I think a big part of people's thought process on today is it's the start of a new chapter, but it's also, in essence, a breath of fresh air. This election was so demeaning, so damaging on so many people, whether you were a Democrat or whether you were a Republican. Both sides were clashing like never before. We saw a long, drawn-out, hard-fought campaign. And just when we go back to the election cycle, Jeff, I just am wondering if the election itself maybe put a damper on what we're seeing today, in that instead of people celebrating, it's we just want to get this done.
Well, look, this is not a celebratory inaugural like 2009, where Barack Obama had 2 million people. And even conservatives and Republicans kind of begrudgingly saying positive things about the inauguration. I mean, it is a damper, the hyper-partisanship of the election, but I think even more than that, it's the pandemic and the insurrection that have cast this decided gloom, a muted inaugural. At the same time, this is politically for President-elect Biden auspicious. If you can take over at what really is the bottom depths of the Trump presidency.
What's going to happen after the inauguration and after today? You were talking a little bit about the fact that the balance of power in Congress, Jeff, could potentially, in essence, get things done, things we didn't see in the last few months of the presidency for Donald Trump. I'm wondering your thoughts as we welcome everybody in on Facebook for our Inauguration Day celebration, ceremony, if you will, here on Erie News Now Plus. But, Jeff, just your thoughts on this new Congress, democratically controlled by everyone, by the Democrats in all three branches. How do you see things going in the next couple of weeks, next couple of months in terms of legislation, whether it be that stimulus bill or other things that we're expecting Joe Biden to put on the table?
Well, in terms of the stimulus bill, the Democrats can pass it through what's called a budget reconciliation. Mm-hmm. And so you do not need, for that, you do not need 60 votes. The Republicans do not have the power to stop it via the filibuster. So in terms of that particular piece of legislation, the Democrats largely have a free hand. What they desperately want, and I would argue they absolutely need, they have to have Republican votes. You can't run as the unity candidate and then have a Democratic-only stimulus package as your initial piece of legislation. So I think in the first week or so, they're going to be trying to woo Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Mitt Romney, a variety of Republicans to sign on to this. On top of that, you have impeachment. Will they do the trial soon, or will they wait 100 days for an investigation? That has all kinds of peril to bog the Biden legislation kind of package down. So we're going to begin with, impeachment now or impeachment later. Will you get Republicans to sign on to the stimulus bill because they desperately have to have some Republican votes? They have to, in the Senate and in the House. And I think they're going to get that. Maybe not 1.9 trillion worth, but they're going to get something. And then you're going to have a flurry of executive orders. Look, Joe Biden is not Barack Obama. He's not John Kennedy. He's not, charismatic in that sense. The charisma of Joe Biden will be making the trains run on time. And after the last 4 years, President Trump is not the most efficient administrator. I think even his voters and his celebrants would admit that. Joe Biden's route to kind of wooing Republicans to his side, which he needs, is just being competent.
It's interesting you mentioned that because we've talked about in the last couple of weeks when you and I have been sitting here and talking that the Republican support for Joe Biden is, while still not great, it's better than what you would expect. We see at least 5 or 6 senators in particular. You mentioned Lisa Murkowski. Mitt Romney would be one as well, the former presidential candidate on the Republican side. He ran against Joe Biden, Barack Obama. There was a lot of talk in the last couple of weeks about how Joe Biden might be able to use his previous friendship, his previous time in Congress, to be able to help woo over the support of Republicans. And my question to you then, Jeff, is, do you see that happening? Do you see the element of friendship and maybe truth and honesty could be enough to say for some Republicans, if there's a bill in place, I'm willing to go to your side?
Yes. For a generation, Democrats, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, outsiders who didn't know Washington, didn't know how it worked, didn't have relationships. And in all 3 cases, all 3 of those presidents struggled. Barack Obama and Bill Clinton kind of managed effectively eventually. Joe Biden not only has relationships, he knows how the Capitol works, how the Congress works. It's not that Mitch McConnell is going to start voting for Joe Biden's legislation, but those 2 are legitimate friends. Mitch McConnell went to the church service today with Joe Biden. Mitch McConnell was at Joe Biden's son, Beau's, funeral. They're legitimate friends. And it doesn't mean conservatives are going to become liberals, but it does mean that you're going to have a Washington that's more likely to work. The best comp for Joe Biden is Lyndon Johnson, the master of the Senate, as he was called when he was Senate Majority Leader. I mean, you need someone. When your car is broken, you take it to a mechanic who understands how to work on that car. And I think the Democratic Party, in their desire to elect somebody with Washington outsider experience, which is popular, they've forgotten that you need to have somebody who also understands how to make the car run. And this is the first time in a generation that Democrats have somebody who understands how Washington can work. Now, that's not a guarantee that they're going to pass his agenda, but I like his chances a lot more than any president since Lyndon Johnson as far as working with Congress and actually achieving some significant legislation.
Interesting that we've continued to talk about the battle back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. Joe Biden, we anticipate, will try his best to work with Republicans. Let's look to the other side, the Republican Party. There was a lot of division at the beginning of the Republican primary in 2015 and 16. Several Republicans, nearly all of them, said we don't want Donald Trump as president. We want somebody else, someone who we believe is better situated to handle the country. Trump gets sworn in, he gets elected president, and at that point we started to see a shift that many Republicans took him as their own and said, this is what we have. My question in this is, do we see a continuation of the Trump Congress, the Trump Republicans, or do you think in due time there might be a switching back to the quote-unquote establishment Republican, as would be maybe a Mike Pence or someone of that nature?
Well, establishment Republicans are not going to snap back into place. The establishment of 2021 is not going to be the establishment of 2015. At the same time, Trump is going to leave office.
Speaking of which, here is the vice president right now coming down the steps, and really, truly, as you can see, the difference of what we're seeing now between the president and the vice president. As the vice president walks down the stairs, we're looking up at our big board here. We see President Trump's Air Force One plane land in Florida, where he's about to go to his Mar-A-Lago resort. So just the difference there. But back to you talking about the Republicans and the difference between the 2015 and 2021 establishment.
Yeah, the establishment, I think, is going to be more kind of Trumpified. But, Lyndon Johnson once said, power is where power goes. And that's what he believed when he became vice president, that he would still be powerful. That's not the case. President Trump is not going to be president. He's going to lose his influence and control over large swaths of the Republican Party. And so the Republican Party, since its inception, has always been a much more disciplined party in the rank and file. This impeachment, the Senate trial for impeachment is going to be telling. Does Mitch McConnell, are Republicans, there are some who observe that Mitch McConnell and Republicans are going to try to exercise the president's influence over the party by voting to convict. Whether they do that or not, the president's stranglehold over Republicans in Congress is going to wane. What we're going to see in the next 2 to 4 years is a civil war in the Republican Party, the likes of which we've never seen. And maybe you could go back to the 1912 election when the Republican Party split into two, between William Howard Taft and Teddy Roosevelt. But this is even uglier and I think even more divisive. That Republican Party, came back together largely and was able to kind of run a competitive election for the presidency in 1916 and nearly win. This is a much taller order. The divide is really stark.
Inauguration ceremony live coverage here on Erie News Now. If you're joining us on ENN Plus or Facebook, we thank you for tuning in here with Jeff Bloodworth, a professor at Yale University. He's also a political expert. He's been with us night, day, and morning when it comes to our election coverage. Of course, this is the culmination of all of that here. As we take a look now, you see the inaugural steps being filled up here in what is a watered-down ceremony in terms of the number of people who are there. The flags on the steps of the Capitol, and the flags you can see as I take this graphic off here, the American flag and the flags behind it representing those who have lost their lives due to COVID-19, who are not able to be at the inaugural ceremony here on January 20th, as this is the customary date for the inauguration. Taking a look now, we'll see if we can get this feed in just a second. President Trump's plane touching down at Mar-A-Lago Resort. Let's see if we can get that here on for you as I go into our world of buttons here. There's a look. You can see the plane in the double box. On the left-hand side is the inaugural ceremony. On the right-hand side is President Trump arriving in Florida. And with that, Jeff, I want to ask you a question. President Trump, in his final address to supporters, one of the last things he said is, "We'll be back in some capacity." To you, to this date today, what does some capacity mean?
I think either a media company kind of styled upon Fox News as a competitor to Fox News, a media personality. There have been rumors of a potential reality show based upon the presidency. He's going to attempt. Look, the president's in financial trouble. He needs to, every day he's not president, he loses relevance. He loses market share. I think quickly he's going to have to pivot and transition to try to maintain the limelight that he has and essentially kind of cash in on his new kind of brand as a media figure. Trump's real estate properties in kind of large urban centers, these are not places where Trump supporters live. And this is, that part of his kind of empire is struggling. And so he's going to have to do something in terms of media and in terms of politics in order to maintain his brand and to, frankly, deal with his enormous debts that are accruing.
And I'm sure there are several people who may take the words of "we'll be back" as "I'm going to run again." Do you think he ever runs again for president or some office at some capacity?
Well, if the Senate convicts, he is barred.
Right.
There's also the option of convicting him according to the 14th Amendment, which says if you stage an insurrection, you cannot hold federal office. That only takes 60 votes. That's seen as a compromise between the Senate convicting, but also keeping Trump from running. Because from Mitch Mcconnell and the establishment's perspective, they don't want the president to run for re-election in 24. I don't know what's going to happen. The president wants that ability to say he's going to run. Do they have 67? Will 17 Republicans join with Democrats? Mitch Mcconnell signaled yesterday that he possibly would vote. I think the votes could be there. If I had to bet, I would say the president is not going to run in 24. Even if he's not convicted, the best he will do is hint at running and not actually run.
There is the president stepping off Air Force One for the final time as president. One of the reasons he left when he did leave is because if he had left around noon, he wouldn't have access to Air Force One, being no longer the president of the United States. So it'll be his last ride on Air Force One. You see him and First Lady Melania Trump getting into an armored vehicle where they will depart for Mar-A-Lago. On the left-hand side, the inaugural ceremony where Vice President Mike Pence is attending. So you see the stark difference, the president and the vice president on Inauguration Day, thousands of miles from each other on different sides of the United States. Let's go back through, Jeff. We talked about Trump and his potentials for 2024. Let's talk about Biden's path to get to this point. A seasoned senator, a seasoned member of Congress, somebody who has tried to run for president before, didn't even make it out of the Democratic primary. He barely got any votes at all, was on the bottom of the totem pole, thought about running again in 2008, ended up joining Barack Obama as the vice president. Let's talk about his road to get here from a historical standpoint. We'll dive in further of the 2020 election now, but just the road for Biden to be able to get to where he is now, several failures, and then the success when he ran in 2020.
Well, this is the only similarity between President Trump and President-elect Biden, is that they are throwbacks. President Biden's path to the presidency broke every single rule that had governed Democratic presidential primaries since the early 1970s. Starting in 1972, new rules were made that took power away from sort of the backroom political power brokers. And how you won the Democratic nomination was by being charismatic, a Washington outsider, relatively young, inexperienced. That's how you won the Democratic nomination. Just look who the Democratic nominees and Democratic presidents were. Carter, Clinton, Obama were the winners. They all fit that mold. Even the Democratic kind of losers many times fit that mold. Biden's a throwback to when power brokers controlled the party. And he won the nomination, surprising everybody, including myself, by winning in the most unorthodox way. He's the consummate insider. He's anything but young. He's charismatic, right, in small groups, but not a charismatic orator on the level of a Kennedy or Obama. So he's a return to the Democratic Party before 1972. It's fascinating in that way. I did not expect a Democrat like Biden to win the nomination under the current rules. Only because of Trump and COVID is Biden possible.
Does that mean to you that the majority of Americans who vote on the Democratic side still prefer your traditional establishment by-the-book candidate? Because we saw early on candidates such as Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, those you would call progressive. Even Kamala Harris at one point was ahead in the primary. We saw that spike in votes for them, and then we slowly but surely started to see Biden make his way to the top. Does that give you an idea, maybe, Jeff, of the demographics of where we are at still right now on the Democratic side in America?
Yeah, Twitter is not reality.
Ain't that the truth?
Most Democrats are quite moderate. And I would even go further than this. Nothing is more healthy in a democracy than Americans, sitting down and thinking, how would other Americans who don't think the way I do, how are they going to perceive my party's candidate? And what millions of Democrats did in the primary is, they had this kind of healthy moral imagination. How would conservatives, how would other moderates, how would they perceive my candidate? And they opted for Joe Biden out of quote-unquote electability, and that's often poo-pooed, especially on the progressive left. But I would argue that's an extraordinarily healthy thing for democracy. I wish more Americans would try to inhabit the mental and psychological space of other Americans and you're putting yourself in the shoes of your fellow citizens. That's a healthy and positive thing. And the Democratic Party is a liberal party, but it's a moderately liberal party. That's where the center of gravity is. It wasn't even close. Bernie Sanders was second place, but he never really. After South Carolina, Bernie Sanders was never a viable challenger to Joe Biden. I mean, the moderates won, and it wasn't even close.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because when you go back through the primary, Bernie Sanders had a pretty commanding lead early on before South Carolina, And the way that lead just waned in a matter of hours, pretty incredible once Biden won South Carolina, swept the rest, and the rest is history. Let's focus in on 2020 in the general election and Biden's path to get to the presidency. It wasn't an easy campaign, having to host drive-in rallies, wanting to maintain social distance. There was no crowd when he came to Erie, Pennsylvania, back in September. Toured around a couple of plants here and then made a bit of a speech at what was a press-only event. Drive-in rallies for him. The president, by the way, while that was going on, was still hosting in-person rallies. It really looked like the president had still a strong backing, and he did. How was Biden able to overcome that of what many people thought was a strong presidential base for Trump and get the win in 2020?
You know, the president, needed 4 aces in order to win re-election, and he got 3. He almost, if not for 50,000 votes in Arizona, Georgia, what's the third state? We would have had a 269 electoral college tie.
Nevada could have been it.
Yeah,
or Pennsylvania could have been it.
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin,
yeah.
Correct.
For a Democrat to win the presidency without door-to-door campaigning, without massive kind of voter registration drives, I mean, it is inconceivable. This is how Democrats win, when they register their voters and they have massive turnout drives. I would argue that the Republican gains in the House, they won 13 House seats, which surprised everybody. I would argue that's because Democrats didn't do door-to-door campaigning, because those 13 House seats were most of those races were decided by hundreds of votes. In contrast, you look at Georgia, where Democrats finally did door-to-door campaigning. I mean, they did it according to COVID rules. They won both Senate seats. Joe Biden performed what I thought was the political impossible. He won the nomination as a figure that as an establishment figure with deep Washington insider experience. That hasn't been the case since before 1972. And then he, had this kind of bizarre campaign where, you didn't have massive rallies, you didn't have massive voter registration drives. The president had a lot of energy. His rallies, got his base to turn out. It just wasn't enough.
And it's funny you mentioned that. We had one of the biggest, if not the biggest, I believe it was the biggest voter turnout in the history of presidential elections. And that was the argument for Trump supporters is, when you're talking about the election fraud claims that the president made, President Trump got more not electoral votes, but more votes than any other Republican candidate in the history of the U.S. Biden just was able to turn up that base, particularly in inner cities and big cities where the vote didn't turn out for Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Yeah, he was able to turn out the Democratic base. He was able to lower the president's kind of wide margins in rural America, not by a lot, but this was if we think about, Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin, 50,000 total votes. I mean, in those kind of elections, everything matters. In 2016, the Clinton campaign just did a dreadful job of kind of turning out their voters, especially in a place like Pennsylvania. They took things for granted. Biden, to his credit, they never listened to the public polls that showed a wide lead. They ignored all the chatter, and they focused upon Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and getting to 270. I think too many people are giving, all the credit to maybe Stacey Abrams in Georgia, or saying Trump lost the election. This is to Biden's benefit. He's being underestimated again and again and again. If I'm a politician, I want to be underestimated. Heck, if you're in your workplace, you want to be underestimated, right? I mean, this is kind of Joe Biden's secret sauce, is that from the outside, he's not this kind of Barack Obama kind of rock star. He's quiet and steady, and I think we're going to see results.
So are you saying then, as opposed to 2016 when Hillary Clinton was the clear-on favorite, some words of 10 to 15 points to win the election, you're saying then that Biden's underdog mentality might have won him the 2020 election despite him still being ahead in the polls?
Yeah, I think behind the scenes, he brought in a lot of Obama people to help him run the campaign, and they were laser focused on Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. The Clinton people in 2016 started looking at Arizona. They started looking at electoral landslides. They assumed they had 270. The Biden people never made that assumption. Right? I mean, they were laser focused on Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, and those races, according to Biden insiders, they always expected it to be close, maybe not within 1 point. I think they thought 2 or 3 points. But because they premised the campaign that these states were going to be close, they were able to withstand a polling error, right, which Clinton did not withstand, and win in those states. They were close, but this was a decisive win. I mean, if you think about, the last time an elected incumbent president lost in a one-on-one race. Elected incumbents will lose in kind of multi-party races. But it has been since Herbert Hoover was the last elected incumbent to lose in a one-on-one race. And so what Biden was able to do was, historic.
You think about exactly what's going on today. You just saw the president-elect walking down the steps. He's getting ready to exit those doors. Let's take a full-screen picture here as we continue to talk with Jeff. Jeff, it goes to show, and I know a lot of people in Erie have heard about millions of times how important Erie County is, but you think of the last 2 elections, how important the Rust Belt states are to win yourself the election. You had Trump winning Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania in 2016. That's how he was able to get the presidency over Hillary Clinton. Biden flipped 3 of those states in 2020. We've got the Sun Belt down south, the Rust Belt in the Midwest, and then those Midwestern states in the middle of the country, the Arizonas and Nevadas that were critical. In your mind, I guess my question is the presidency in 2024 and beyond going to come down to 3 or 4 states in the Rust Belt, or do we see a changing landscape in the next 4 years?
Well, there's a changing landscape. The Republican control of rural America means the Electoral College is tilted towards them. That for Democrats to win in the Electoral College, they're going to have to win well over 50% of the vote. They estimate 51, maybe 52%. Mm-hmm. But think of it like a seesaw. The Rust Belt, right, as the white, if things hold the way they have been, and the white working class is moving towards the Republican Party. I'm not sure that's 100% an eventuality, but let's assume it is. You have the Rust Belt tilting Republican at the same time that you have the Sun Belt tilting towards the Democrats. And so in 2024, if it's Biden or Harris, whoever the Democratic standard bearer is, having that seesaw work for them. I mean, to bring both the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt into their column was a solid Electoral College win. That's the balance, because the Sun Belt, I think, is clearly tilting towards the Democrats. Can the Democrats maintain their control in the Rust Belt? And it's all about kind of non-college educated whites.
Interesting. You mentioned that with the state of Georgia, that was the key, and that's the reason why you see the Sun Belt potentially turning with the 2 Senate wins. And, of course, the presidential win for Joe Biden. Let's listen in for just 1 second as Biden is introduced to the inauguration stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Please welcome the Honorable Amy Klobuchar.
Vice President Pence, President-elect, Madam Vice President-elect, members of Congress and the judicial branch, former presidents and first ladies, vice presidents, leaders from abroad, and a whole bunch of Bidens. America, welcome to the 59th presidential inauguration, where in just a few moments, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will take their solemn oaths. This ceremony is the culmination of 244 years of a democracy. It is the moment when leaders brought to this stage by the will of the people promise to be faithful to our Constitution, to cherish it and defend it. It is the moment when they become, as we all should be, guardians of our country. Have we become too jaded, too accustomed to the ritual of the passing of the torch of democracy to truly appreciate what a blessing and a privilege it is to witness this moment? I think not. 2 weeks ago, when an angry, violent mob staged an insurrection and desecrated this temple of our democracy, it awakened us to our responsibilities as Americans. This is the day when our democracy picks itself up, brushes off the dust, and does what America always does: goes forward as a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This conveyance of a sacred trust between our leaders and our people takes place in front of this shining Capitol dome for a reason. When Abraham Lincoln gave his first inaugural address in front of this Capitol, the dome was only partially constructed, braced by ropes of steel. He promised he would finish it. He was criticized for spending funds on it during the Civil War. To those critics, he replied, "If the people see the Capitol going on, it is a sign we intend the Union shall go on." And it did, and it will. Generations of Americans gave their lives to preserve our republic in this place. Great legislation to protect civil rights and economic security and lead the world was debated and crafted under this dome. Now it falls on all of us, not just the two leaders we are inaugurating today, to take up the torch of our democracy, not as a weapon of political arson, but as an instrument for good. We pledge today never to take our democracy for granted as we celebrate its remarkable strength. We celebrate its resilience, its grit. We celebrate the ordinary people doing extraordinary things for our nation, the doctors and nurses on the front line of this pandemic, the officers in the Capitol, a new generation never giving up hope for justice. We celebrate a new president, Joe Biden, who vows to restore the soul of America and cross the river of our divides to a higher plane. And we celebrate our first African American, first Asian American, and first woman vice president, Kamala Harris, who stands on the shoulders of so many on this platform who have forged the way to this day. When she takes the oath of office, little girls and boys across the world will know that anything and everything is possible. And in the end, that is America, our democracy, a country of so much good. And today, on these Capitol steps and before this glorious field of flags, we rededicate ourselves to its cause. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce to you the senator who has worked with me and so many others to make this ceremony possible, my friend and the chair of the inaugural committee, Missouri Senator Roy Blunt.
There you see Amy Klobuchar finishing her speeches to get things started as the president-elect and vice president-elect are just about a half hour away from being sworn in. And with that, we bring in County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper and our Lisa Adams. County Executive, I heard that you had tickets to this and you passed it up. At least you're not in the cold, I guess.
Well, I should have known.
But Lisa, I'll let you take it away as we continue here on
a touch of snow.
Let's start with the fact that you were able to attend a couple of inaugurations. Talk about this point in time where we are, where this will look so different this year.
Well, this definitely will look different. You know, the crowd is obviously minimal. and they are very spaced out. It's a very different scene, but I think it's still very historic, and it's a peaceful transfer of power that we see every 4 to 8 years, and it's necessary to see this happen today, I think, particularly what's happened in the past few weeks.
It is peaceful now, but it certainly wasn't peaceful on the 6th of January. So talk about the events that led to this super security surrounding Inauguration Day.
Well, as somebody who spent 2 years in that Capitol building, many, many hours, every picture I saw, every bit of footage, I knew exactly where they were in that Capitol building, which is a building that so many of us love and cherish, and it truly is the symbol of our democracy. I never, in my wildest dreams, have thought that it could ever, first of all, that it would ever be attacked by our own citizens, and then to be breached as it was just in disbelief and heartsick.
You know, you see that shot of the chamber, those chamber doors, where so many times we've seen president after president after president walk through those doors to give the State of the Union address, and to see those officers with guns drawn there, it's striking.
It is striking. And, you know, the Speaker's Lounge, which when you're not on the House floor, you often go back into the Speaker's Lounge, and it's more of a lounge, and you sit in the chairs and you chat with your colleagues about things, and that is actually where that one woman was shot as they were trying to break into absolutely beautiful doors there too. So just so many pieces of this, again, so much in disbelief that people in our own country would attack those who are elected by the citizens to serve our country.
Talk a little bit about Joe Biden's campaign. I mean, it was kind of a campaign that couldn't really be robust because of COVID-19 and his position regarding that. But he had a lot of challenges within the party, within your party. You know, at some points in time, people thought he would not at all be the nominee. So what things changed, fell into place to make him rise to the top and now be about to be sworn in?
Well, I guess I'm going to start with saying I think he probably is the absolute right candidate and the right person to lead our country at this particular time. I myself had put my weight behind Amy Klobuchar. I had my name out there as a delegate for Amy Klobuchar, so if she had made it forward, that's where I would have been, my support would have been, but she dropped out. And I think as time went on and this pandemic continued to rage and the debates happened, Joe Biden's history, his knowledge, his expertise, his understanding of the job at this particular moment in time is what the country realized we needed. And our party realized what we needed first. And I think by the time of the convention, all support was behind Joe Biden. Much different than it was 4 years prior when there was quite a divide between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders contingencies. That did not happen this time. I think people realized that Joe Biden had that maybe almost like a fatherly type persona to himself, and a lot of people right now just want someone to care for them, someone to care for this country in the way that a father would care for his family.
So the interesting thing about that is you say he's the right man for the hour because of that, but he's also someone who has spent decades in government. Mm-hmm. So for the half of the country that voted for Donald Trump saying, let's get an outsider in there, Washington's gridlocked, they can't get things accomplished, let's try that for 4 years. I mean, obviously it had its ups and downs, ended on a very down note, clearly. But what about people who are concerned that we're going to kind of go back to how it was, where it's very hard to get things accomplished? Are you confident that he can do that? And is it the right thing to be rolling back with executive orders so many? Is that the right thing to do on day one, or does he need to be listening to that other half of the country too?
Well, I think there's certain things that have to be rolled back simply because of his campaign promises and those people who have supported him and elected him. You know, he did win by a vast majority, so you go with the majority and what they want, right? So he needs to do that. But I think the one thing that Joe Biden has done for all his decades in government, he's been able to reach across the aisle. He's been able to listen to others, hear their opinions, hear their thoughts on how things should be done, and help really to find that middle ground. And that's what we need at this point. We need that middle ground. We need to find ways to compromise.
Isaac, you asked the question at the very beginning about Mrs. Dahlkemper having tickets to go to this event. You were one of the Electoral College votes for Pennsylvania. You could have gone. What made you make the decision to not go this time?
You know, I didn't go for a number of reasons. Number one, because I'm the person telling everyone in Erie County don't travel. I'm always saying you should stay home, stay as close as home as you can. Don't get into crowds. This is a crowd, even a safe crowd. It's still a crowd, and you still have to travel to get there. So that was number one reason. Number two, honestly, my family, because of the security concerns, my family, loved ones, and many people, they asked me not to go. And actually, third, and probably one of the big reasons is my daughters maybe have a baby today or tomorrow. So in the end, I'm a mother first, and I want to be here when my daughter has her baby.
Yeah, certainly good reasons. and I think, obviously, there are plenty of differences when it comes to this inauguration. County Executive, I want to ask you, there were a lot of people who were leading up to this day thinking of it as a fresh start for America, but I think in the last couple of weeks we've seen maybe even a shift, that some people also just want this to be the end of an era. I'm just wondering what you've heard from the people of Erie and the people that you speak to on their thoughts of whether they see this as a new beginning or more so of an end of an era, and which one they believe is more applicable to this inauguration day here.
That's a very tough question, because I think this is just a moment, right? Today is a moment, and there's a lot that has to be done to move into a new era, or to end an era and to move into a new beginning. And I think only time is going to tell which it is. And I think all of us, as optimistic and as hopeful as I am today, I'm also a realist and know that these things are very hard to do, and that we are an extremely divided country, we're an extremely divided state, and we are an extremely divided county. And I think Erie County is actually in some ways just a microcosm of what we are as a nation. So all of us in government and leaders in this community and across the state and nation need to find ways to talk to each other, to listen to each other, and hopefully make this the new beginning that our country truly, and honestly, I'll say our world, so desperately needs.
How does that happen as the incoming president to a country so divided? What, in your mind, do the first steps need to be from the president and the vice president to make sure that they're on a path, or at least saying the things that needed to be said to preach unity? What are the first steps need to be taken for that to happen?
The first thing you need to do is build relationships. One of the things about Joe Biden is he already has a lot of good relationships, particularly in the Senate. But he and Kamala Harris need to continue to do that, and they need to reach out to their own party, because you've got to build those relationships, especially to the people that are way off, maybe to the left, and they've got to also find particularly the moderates on the Republican side, but they also need to listen to those on the far end. And I think relationships is where everything begins. If you don't know people, then how can you even understand where they're coming from? So you've got to find a way to build those relationships. And I think the other thing with Joe Biden is he comes from pretty humble beginnings. He comes from Pennsylvania originally, and I think he understands the culture of communities like Erie County and Pennsylvania as a whole, and I think that will serve him well.
There were some people saying that in that moment when the Capitol was attacked, that some lawmakers who don't speak to each other were huddled together somewhere and they started to talk about stuff. I mean, it's sad that it takes that for that to happen. But certainly we've heard a different tone from Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, and others after that. Were you surprised by their change in tone, enough is enough, or a willingness to let this impeachment process go forward?
From where I stood, in my opinion, this is my opinion, I don't have any facts to back this up, I think that they were actually uncomfortable where they had to be prior to that moment. I don't think they were very comfortable with some of the rhetoric and other things coming out of the President Trump's, Twitter feeds and other things, and having to support some of that. So I think this actually, for them, in my opinion, probably in some ways was a relief to be able to say, we've got to shift more towards the center. We've got to talk to each other the way we used to talk to each other.
I know it's not the first time that a president has not been at an outgoing president has not been at an inauguration of the incoming president, but it's rare. So your thoughts on Donald Trump's departure today? Did he say things he should have said on election night about the fact that he, hopes the Biden administration accomplishes things, they will accomplish things? And then talk about Mike Pence. I mean, he is there instead as the vice president. Talk about his doing the right thing, maybe things he's been uncomfortable with during the administration, but doing the right thing in that key moment.
Elections are hard. And losing an election is very difficult. I've been on both the winning side and the losing side of an election. Anyone who's run for election knows how this feels. In the end of the day, what we've always done in our country, for the most part, is graciously concede and move on to fight another day. That's what I wish the president had done. I wish today, even as he was leaving, he would have made remarks that actually congratulated Joe Biden, but he didn't, and others are there to do that instead. And I hope that what we're seeing happening here in terms of this transfer of power from this man from Donald Trump to Joe Biden, I hope this does not become the norm. I hope that in the future we go back to what we've always seen, and that's that the presidents congratulate each other, that they work together for that transition, and that we move forward.
We haven't really asked you about Kamala Harris. Talk about her role as vice president and how you think she might bring a different energy or spirit to that office than others before her have.
Well, first of all, I'm thrilled that she's a woman. I am thrilled for all the other women who aspire to elected office and now have a fantastic model to look towards, that yes, you can reach those levels. She's also a woman of color, first black woman, first Indian woman, and first woman. So she hits a lot of things, as we all know. I'm not telling anybody things they don't know. And she and herself, I think, has really grown through this whole process. And exactly when you talk about elections, her and Joe Biden obviously had some pretty tense moments in some of the debates. And they've been able to work through that, come to know each other, know that they're not always going to agree on everything, but they're going to work. I think they're going to be a great team. I think they're actually going to play off of each other pretty well. I look at myself with Gary Lee. We're very different in many ways, and yet we've been a great match for each other. And I think I see some of that kind of similarity, that those two will bring different experiences from their own life experiences, and that will be helpful to both.
Thoughts on Dr. Rachel Levine being tapped to be Assistant Secretary of Health? I mean, certainly you've had your friction with the state government over, that I think about that moment in time where we weren't allowed to open and how different things are now than they were then. We were in so much better shape than we are now. So talk about this honor, this moment for Dr. Levine.
Well, first of all, congratulations to Dr. Levine, and it really is great for the state that we have someone of her caliber going into the Biden administration. She has led our state, I think, as well as she can, considering that public health, honestly, for decades in Pennsylvania has been under-resourced. Considering the fact that most counties don't even have their own health department. That's very different than in many other states, including our state to the east, New York State, where pretty much every county has their own health department. So she had an under-resourced department and a pandemic with very poor federal leadership. I think she did a good job. She continues to work for us today, but she will be missed, and I'm not sure who will fill that void, because it's a big void to fill.
I want to go back to what you were saying about what you believe will be the collusion between Biden and Harris. We saw a stark difference, especially today, with Vice President Pence and President Trump at two different parts of the U.S. at the same time on Inauguration Day. What are some of those things on either side that Harris and Biden will bring to the table that you think will allow each other to, in essence, work in tandem as a president and vice president? Maybe that didn't happen in the prior administration.
I think Joe Biden is going to really use Kamala Harris as a confidant and use her intellect, use her skill set, use her knowledge to help him as he's making very difficult decisions. She brings to the table the fact that she's a woman. And I can tell you from my own experience, working with men in leadership positions, we do come at things differently. Neither one is better, but when we both come together and bring our experiences, it helps us to see things in a new and clear way. She also brings the fact that she is a woman of color. And so some of the experiences that she and her family and others have had will also be brought to that table. When you experience something, it's much different than reading about it. And I think the two of them will bring both of those experiences, East Coast, West Coast. There's just a lot of differences that I think will play well.
You're also understanding of the importance of a cabinet making those selections to make sure you delegate responsibilities efficiently. We saw in the prior administration, particularly in the last couple of months, the difference and the resignations of several of those cabinet members. Your thoughts on the nominees for specific cabinet members that President-elect Biden has had, and how you think that they might be able to help or, in essence, continue to lead the country and where they're designated to be?
Well, I think the sign of a true leader is finding the right people to assist you in that leading. I always said you got to find people that are smarter than you in their subject area, who have the expertise to give you the advice that you need when you have to make those decisions. And so Joe Biden seems to have picked many people who have that type of experience. I don't know all of the different cabinet choices he's made. I know of many of them. And so far, I'm very pleased at his selections, and I think he's very thoughtful about how he's going about this. And I look forward to their confirmation.
Talk about Merrick Garland specifically. Was that an important appointment just because that kind of provided an opportunity where an opportunity was perhaps squelched in the past?
I think that's the one that made me smile the most. I think Merrick Garland will bring just such a great professionalism and skill set to his position. And again, he would have been a great Supreme Court justice, I believe. So this is a great opportunity for him to serve his country in a different way.
County Executive, if you don't mind, we're going to go ahead and take this feed live right now. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris being sworn in.
I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
That I will well and faithfully discharge.
The duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
The duties of the office upon which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
And with that, Kamala Harris has been officially inaugurated as the Vice President of the United States. You see the moment there, hugging her husband, Doug Emhoff. What a moment, and you can see the fist bump and the excitement there. And County Executive, like you said, a historic moment and someone you believe checks all the boxes.
I tell you, I have the biggest smile on my face underneath this mask, and I'm almost a little teary watching this happen. I think for every woman in this country, this is a moment we will all remember. Wow. I'm a little bit choked up. I'm a little bit overwhelmed by, I didn't know that I would be, but I am overwhelmed by this moment.
You can see the former Vice President Mike Pence giving his regards. And, a changing of the guard in many ways, but also ushering in a new era.
That is so true. It is rushing in it's bringing in a new era. Joe Biden's been around for a long time, and I think he's great to lead, but Kamala Harris is going to bring a new energy and diversity to the head of our government, and I think that is phenomenal for all going into the future.
See the scene on Capitol Hill. In due time, very shortly here, President-elect Joe Biden will be brought out, and the inauguration will take place. 11:43 right now, around noon, is when the President-elect set to be sworn in. And County Executive, we're talking just about the importance of being able to have not just that diversity, but that different mindset and that different value of opinion, if you will, between Biden and Harris. I think a few people, were concerned at the beginning when Biden selected Harris, not for her demeanor, but that back and forth that they had and whatnot. And just, I guess we talked about this a little bit earlier, but just your take on their ability to reconcile those differences, because regardless of who you are, it's not easy when you run against somebody and then join them.
That is absolutely true, and I think that shows a lot about their character, that they can get past those differences, which we know were very tense and quite testy, actually, and that they could sit down and talk about their differences and then decide that they're going to actually work together in a very close situation for 4 years. I can't say enough about, truly, my own experience makes me think about this a lot. Gary Lee is a man of color, and he's a man, and I'm a woman, and I have often said that partnership that he and I have had through these 7 years, and now one more to come, has been truly part of my success as county executive. So I do hope that they have the same kind of success by bringing forward really their diversity of experience.
What we're seeing unfold here looks somewhat like inaugurations have looked in the past, except for the much smaller crowd that you see there. And as Isaac said, the president-elect about to take the oath in just a few minutes here. But the big celebration of the win, and the big celebration with ball after ball after ball, something that you've experienced in Washington. Are you sad that that isn't happening, or even if this violence hadn't happened at the Capitol, that was not going to be possible really because of COVID?
Everything has changed because of COVID. And I've thought a lot about that. Take the violence out of this, but of the entire process. You know, again, you didn't have that big scene. If we remember, when other presidents have won, they've always had a big event that night. That did not happen. We didn't even have the big rallies coming into this on the Democratic side. Going to these inaugurations, a lot of it is about the parties that surround it. When Obama was first inaugurated, I went to the Lincoln Memorial for the big concert that they had a few days before the inauguration, and there was millions of people there. So it was a whole, basically, week of events, and none of that will happen. And I was actually thinking about those who are representatives who've never been to inauguration before. If they don't last more than a couple terms, they will never go to inauguration as a representative. And I'm also looking at the seating. We actually sat directly up from the president when I was there. All of the members of Congress were there. Now, the senators are spread out there, and the members of the House are further up, so they're even further away. So it's just very different, but it's historic in its own way. It will be a very unique inauguration to have attended.
What's that experience like of attending an inauguration? Just the largeness of it. Of course, this one different, but for someone who's never been there before, what's the atmosphere like on a day like that?
Celebratory for sure. I mean, I remember this was in 2009, and going to the Capitol that day and the throngs of people heading towards the Capitol. And then I went in the Capitol. I went up to the third floor, which is where the gallery is. That was obviously talked about a couple weeks. And there's some small rooms, and there was little windows, and I could look out onto the mall. And the sea of people out there, it just took my breath away and gave me chills. And then when you actually line up and you walk out and you're up in those stands and you're looking out onto the mall, and there is our president and president-elect at that time, both sitting there, and all those other people whose names and faces you've seen over the years, it truly is historic, and it's something I feel so honored and privileged to have been able to be part of.
You know, Erie was considered a bellwether community in a couple of elections here, Erie County. But I think Erie County is a bellwether in so...
I hate to interject,
sure,
but we are about to get the oath of office from President-elect Joe Biden, so we're going to take this full right now and listen in.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Joseph Robinette Biden, Jr., do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden, Jr., do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute.
That I will faithfully execute.
The office of President of the United States.
Office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Pretty sure you can see the tears on the face of the now President Joe Biden, the 46th President of the United States. He and Kamala Harris are the new tandem in the White House. You can see behind leaders of Congress witnessing the moment. This was not an easy road to get here if you're Joe Biden. We talked about the years in politics, the years in Congress, the presidential runs before that were not successful. But this one was. And on January 20th, 2021, we have our 46th President of the United States.
Wow, what a moment. And there he is with Amy Klobuchar, another former opponent of his, and asked her to speak, and just so many things that he's done to be inclusive and to heal, I think, the scars of war, the scars of the war of politics. He is already, way before today, been working to heal so many of those scars and wounds.
I was about to say before he took the oath there that Erie County really does reflect the nation's problems in terms of some racial unrest that we saw here in our own community this past summer, and then the issues with the COVID-19 virus and the domino effect of the economic issues that came out of that. So what are you most looking for as a county executive here in your last year in office from this Biden administration, and how much federal help can we get economically without hurting our own pocketbooks to pay the taxes to make it happen?
Well, I think the first thing I am most looking forward to is to have a national strategy around this pandemic. How do we have the vaccine, but how do we get it in the arms of everyone? How do we continue to control some of the other things around this? We need to be looking for a cure long term, drugs that will help cure this in the long term. So there's a lot of work that will be done, and obviously Joe Biden's team is on it. They are going to take this obviously very, very seriously. You can even see that by the setup today and everything that he's done throughout his whole campaign and up to this moment, that this virus is something that he's making his #1 priority.
Well, what about schools? I mean, the day that we're talking about this here, we've got some athletic programs at some high schools that are having to suspend things right now because of the spread of the virus. I mean, the whole school question has gone forward and backward in fits and starts. Is it safe to be in school? Should we be there? Should we be doing athletics? Can it be done safely? We've seen cases where it seems like it's going along safely and then suddenly it's not. So national strategy or not, how are we going to navigate this, right here?
That to me is one of the biggest issues that we have to address. We want our kids to be in school. My concern actually with the number of seniors and others that are now put into the 1A is our teachers are in the 1B group, and I think one of the best things we can do is get our teachers all vaccinated. That would get our children all back in school because our teachers are the most vulnerable. The children may get COVID, may not, but they don't seem to have the terrible symptoms as much. And then once our teachers can get back to teaching full time, that helps our businesses because so many parents really rely on schools to watch their children while they're working. So there's a lot of complications to this. Sports are interesting because they've taken such a priority, and I often question that. Should we be allowing sports at this point? That to me has been probably the biggest issue with schools that I kind of disagree with. I think that we need to educate our children. And I had children who did sports, and I loved for them to be active and doing all that. But right now, we need to get our kids educated, and the sports, in my opinion, if this is where the cause is, and it seems to be, that should go to that should be held off until we get past this point.
I think it's probably the age-old question of government. I mean, you want that national strategy in terms of you want leadership, but states are fiercely independent, and so are counties fiercely independent, because I've seen throughout the pandemic times where people are saying, we need leadership, and then when leadership comes, we don't want that, we don't want to follow those rules. We're our own county. We're far away from that. We ought to be able to figure it out for ourselves. So do you think we're going to continue to see that tug and pull between who's really in charge of this response? Is it federal? Is it state? Is it local?
I think it's a combination of all, but some things have to be done on a federal level. In county government, we can't get vaccine manufactured. We can't get, recently there was a shortage of pipettes to be able to do the testing. We can't get pipettes, made. I mean, I guess we could. We're in Erie with lots of plastics, but that's not what county government does. So we need the federal government to do their job and then send those resources down to the local level so that we can do our job. And that's where the break has been. We haven't had a strategy around testing. We haven't had the testing kits that we've needed, the supplies, everything that you need for testing. And now we don't have enough vaccine ready to go into the arms of people.
Well, switching back to the inauguration day itself, Isaac asked you what it was like to be there, but do you have a favorite moment or memory or two? I remember bumping into you somewhere. We were shopping somewhere together, and you were trying on dresses looking for the right thing to wear to inauguration. So did you enjoy a couple of those balls, or one in particular?
Yeah, I was at the Pennsylvania-Delaware ball, and Joe Biden was there, as well as President Obama and his wife. So they were there because, of course, it was the Delaware-Pennsylvania ball, and it was probably one of the highlights of that evening to be at that particular ball. So yeah, there was, oh my gosh, there's so many moments, but I think honestly for me the moment was just walking out of the Capitol going to your seat and looking out at that sea, I think of people, 2 million people they said were there that day. Every rooftop was covered with people, as far as you could see down to the Lincoln. People everywhere, and people were very peaceful. And I don't believe anyone was arrested that day. It was a beautiful scene, and it was cold. It was really, really cold. And those people had been out there for hours and hours to wait for this moment. And I actually have one other story that's very personal. Luther and Connie Manis had tickets. I had, about 200 tickets for people in the district, and Luther and Connie had 2 of those tickets. And that day, no one was really allowed to drive towards the Capitol except for members of Congress. And I told Luther and Connie I would drive them in my car. And so we drove, and as we were going towards the Capitol, and the sea of people, many of them people of color, were walking towards the Capitol for this inauguration. And I just saw a little tear come down Luther's face, and I said, boy, this has a meaning for him that I can never truly understand. And that's what I think, too, with Kamala Harris today. That's why, for me as a woman, I think that was so emotional. And I think that's what this says to our country, is that you, too, no matter if you are a person of color, if you're a woman, or you're a white male, or whatever you are, you can actually lead this country if you work hard at it and you have the skill set and you have the desire and all of those things. So
it's a good message for all kinds of young girls.
It is. It really is. It's a message that will resonate. Like she said, she's leading the way, but she's not the last, and she's leading the way for so many.
You're being so positive and upbeat, but I'm going to turn the table here for just a moment. So you talked about the challenge for Joe Biden within his own party to rally those forces, whether they're on the left or in the middle of the Democratic Party, and also then to work across the aisle. And certainly with his experience in Washington, he can hit the ground running because he knows how Washington works. Something that Donald Trump didn't know and seemed to chafe against throughout his administration. But as the blue dog Democrat, when the whole health care debate was going on, you saw how polarizing it can be even within your own party. So how does he overcome that?
That is a challenge. I mean, that's not going away, and I don't want to sugarcoat it that it is. And there will be many, many battles and fights that happen between the president and Congress, both in his own party and, of course, in the other parties. So he's got a big, big job in front of him. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I think he's got some of the biggest challenges that any modern president has had to face. And again, I think the best thing that he's doing is surrounding himself with extremely capable people who will help him.
What a day. I think it's safe to say that this is the culmination of what's been happening over the last, not just 4 years, but the last few weeks. And County Executive, we want to thank you for stopping by and sharing this moment here of the inauguration with us. Your insight, your expertise is always appreciated. And we're glad you're with us, even though you did have those tickets. And obviously we'll be thinking of you and your daughter as well as she prepares to have a baby here. You said fairly soon.
Probably sometime in the next day or so. But I have to say, there was a moment this morning where I was like, gosh, I wish I was down there, But, you make those decisions, you live with it, and I think in the end it's the right decision for me.
I'm going to share a little mom moment here if I could. So years and years ago when George H.W. Bush was running in the primary, he came to the studio here to do a news conference, and I was a young director at the time, and they said, Lisa, when George Bush gets here, can you put makeup on him? So we went down the hall, and he had played racquetball at Forest Hills, and he was very nice. He did have Secret Service with him at the time. I put the makeup on. He did the news conference here. He was, I believe, talking about voodoo economics at the time. And the interesting thing was I was pregnant with my first baby on Inauguration Day when he was being inaugurated, and when my husband was leaving the house for work, I jokingly said, oh, I'm in labor, because I just wanted to stay in bed and watch the day of inauguration proceedings. My husband's car went out the driveway, and I went, I think maybe I really am in labor. So I spent that inauguration for hours and hours watching that proceeding in Washington, which was under normal circumstances. So I feel where your daughter is right at this moment. My baby came on the 21st, not the 20th, at about 1:30 in the morning. So I hope that her labor is not as long.
So one of the interesting things is my daughter was a White House fellow during the transition between the Obama administration and the Trump administration, got married at St. Matthew's Church, where President Biden was just recently, and helped, she worked with the GAO and helped now President Biden and his staff transition into their post-vice presidency.
Wow.
So it all comes full circle. Maybe she'll have that baby today, but either way, she'll remember this inauguration every time that baby's birthday shows up.
It's a small world after all. You say that, but things like that make you realize. County Executive, we thank you again. Please update us. Let us know the good news when it happens. And again, your expertise, and we're glad to have you here, and we thank you for taking a few minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So that's County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper. Here is a live look at Capitol Hill right now, where the President Joe Biden is giving his speech. Let's go ahead and listen in on that speech just for a little bit here as we get set up. We're going to have our Matt Knadler live in D.C. in just about 10 minutes, and Jeff Bloodworth rejoins us in a few. Until then, take a listen to the current president speaking live.
Are manipulated and even manufactured. My fellow Americans, we have to be different than this. America has to be better than this. And I believe America is so much better than this. Just look around. Here we stand in the shadow of the Capitol Dome, as was mentioned earlier, completed amid the Civil War, when the Union itself was literally hanging in the balance. Yet we endured. We prevailed. Here we stand, looking out on the great mall where Dr. King spoke of his dream. Here we stand where 108 years ago, at another inaugural, thousands of protesters tried to block brave women marching for the right to vote. And today, we mark the swearing in of the first woman in American history elected to national office, Vice President Kamala Harris. Don't tell me things can't change. Here we stand, across the Potomac from Arlington Cemetery, where heroes who gave the last full measure of devotion rest in eternal peace. And here we stand, just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy, to drive us from this sacred ground. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever. To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you've placed in us. To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. And if you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I pledge this to you. I will be a president for all Americans. All Americans. And I promise you, I will fight as hard for those who did not support me as for those who did. Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies. Look, I understand that many of my fellow Americans view the future with fear and trepidation. I understand they worry about their jobs. I understand, like my dad, they lay at bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering, can I keep my health care? Can I pay my mortgage? Thinking about their families, about what comes next. I promise you, I get it. But the answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you, or worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same sources you do. We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts, if we show a little tolerance and humility, and if we're willing to stand in the other person's shoes, as my mom would say, just for a moment, stand in their shoes. Because here's the thing about life. There's no accounting for what fate will deal you. Some days, when you need a hand. There are other days when we're called to lend a hand. That's how it has to be. It's what we do for one another. And if we are this way, our country will be stronger, more prosperous, more ready for the future. And we can still disagree. My fellow Americans, in the work ahead of us, we're going to need each other. We need all our strength to persevere through this dark winter. We're entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period of the virus. We must set aside politics and finally face this pandemic as one nation. One nation. And I promise you this, as the Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We will get through this together. Together. Look, folks, all my colleagues I serve with in the House and the Senate up here, we all understand the world is watching all of us today. So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. We'll be a strong and trusted partner for peace, progress, and security. Look, you all know we've been through so much in this nation. And my President, I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silent prayer. Remember all those who we lost in this past year to the pandemic. Those 400,000 fellow Americans, moms, dads, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and co-workers. We'll honor them by becoming the people and the nation we know we can and should be. So I ask you, let's say a silent prayer for those who've lost their lives.
You can hear President Biden speaking here as we continue along here. Welcome back inside the Alert Desk. Isaac Petcash, Lisa Adams. We're going to get our Matt Knadler on here in just one moment. I'm going to bring in our Matt Knadler now. We're going to see if he can hear us. We're just a couple of seconds away, Matt, from getting to you, so if you'd be good to go. All right, we've got you up, Matt. We're going to go ahead and put you in the double box here, Matt. Yeah. First of all, I just want to ask you your thoughts on today, what you're seeing, what's going on.
Well, Isaac, this is a historic day, no doubt, and for a number of reasons, and I think we're all a little numb to the word unprecedented here, but this is also somewhat unprecedented. Lucky to have our photographer Mike with us. Let's just kind of show you what we're talking about before we get to the nuts and bolts of the inauguration here. I'll take a quick step out. And this is what we're seeing here. This is along Constitution Avenue here in Washington, D.C. We're on the west end of the National Mall. Now, what we're essentially seeing here is police lining the street. This is, again, kind of what's become, as much as we don't like this term either, the new normal here in Washington for the last week and a half. Ever since those Capitol Hill riots, which was 2 weeks ago today, and Isaac, you and I were on the same the Facebook Live feed here on that day, and we remember just how chaotic that was. Well, this is the result of that. You have the fence about 7-8 foot high here, scaling, blocks and blocks, miles and miles of the National Mall, and of course, as we go farther east here on Constitution Ave, farther northeast, you can kind of see the Washington Monument from where we are, and on the other side of that, as you work your way up the mall, that is where the Capitol is here for today. So, and that's where all the action's happening right now, as now President Joe Biden is wrapping up his inaugural address, Vice President Kamala Harris, and as we said, what is a really historic day here in Washington. I don't know how far we can see. I'm going to kind of walk with Mike real quick, just maybe down. Yeah, you can kind of get the idea of what we're seeing. This has been a ghost town, a fortress, to say the least, here over the last couple of days, really since the weekend. Not a lot of traffic coming in and out, and Constitution Ave, for those who don't know about D.C., this is the real road. This is the way in from neighboring Virginia. So, Isaac, to kind of paint the picture of where we are and what we've been seeing, it's a lot of this. It's pretty quiet, and as we've all expected, thank goodness, after what you and I witnessed live together 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, I think you see that, and you see it's a bit of a different scene, but you also see the interest that people still have in this inaugural ceremony. I want to see, from what you've been hearing and from what you've been talking to people about, just what they've been saying when it comes to a ceremony like this one, different like no other.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, because we still see a lot of people walking, down here on the sidewalk, which is still open to the public here on Constitution Ave. We've seen a few people just sitting down here watching on their phones and trying to take it in as normal as they can make it, and just kind of soaking in the moment as best they can. The weather, as you can see, not too bad today. It's a little chilly, but all in all, really not too bad compared to especially what you guys had the last few days. But, I think there's some people who really still want to take in this moment, to cherish it for what it is, because democracy is, even though some people won't admit it, it was threatened 2 weeks ago, and we may take that for granted. But today is perhaps in its own ceremonial way, a bit of a political Super Bowl here to actually have this go off. From what we're hearing so far, pretty well. No real issues here in Capitol Hill today.
Talk a little bit about what it's like for you to do your job there personally in the last couple of weeks, and even to get where you are today. Did you have to go through security or any questions that were asked of you? I'm certain it's much different moving about than it was a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and Lisa, for I know you know the George Washington University area, part of D.C., and we're not too far from that here. We're just inside the D.C. boundary, basically, where the mall begins or ends, depending on how you look at it. So to get where we are today, it has been pretty tight security, to say the least, and it gets even tighter the farther up Constitution you go. One important note, when we got off the metro, the subway, to get into town today, we saw police, not just from D.C., not just your National Guard troops that we were talking about earlier, the 25,000 plus that are here in town from all corners of the country. First time I had seen police from other cities here today. We saw police from New Orleans. We saw police from Chicago. So some major metro areas sending their law enforcement to D.C. To really make sure everything goes smoothly today. And I can tell you, we saw some National Guard troops when I was here on Monday, probably about a half a block away. Some of the National Guard troops were from Florida, and it's just really interesting to see where people are coming from here to D.C. for all of this. I can tell you, security, the closer you get to the Capitol, we were there for the impeachment proceedings last week, and it was incredibly tight. I always carry my I can take it out here, I got my badge on me, which is, it's a must-have to get anywhere over on Capitol Hill. And I think for a lot of people, that is just pretty much how it is to get into any of these places here today. Also partly why we're here, because security is so tight. We want to try and give you guys the best vantage point that we can, not only of the security, but we can bring you the ceremony as well, that back at the station, and you guys have that part covered. So there's a lot happening, but security's been pretty tight to say the least.
Matt, moving forward, we know in the Trump administration there were several instances where there were those heightened protests, whether they be at the Capitol or across the U.S. I'm wondering, moving forward, do you anticipate even heightened, more so security as we move through the Biden administration, than even more so than what has been in place already through past presidents?
I would expect something, at least in the short term, to be honest with you, and I don't have any hard facts on that, but I've seen some reports this morning that said, while there might not be 25,000 National Guard troops here in D.C., that we might see a couple thousand perhaps patrol the streets outside the Capitol in the early weeks, perhaps month of the Biden administration. And I think that's, again, a sign of, two things really. First of all, how serious officials here in Washington are taking this after the attacks 2 weeks ago, but also perhaps of an acknowledgement of growing threats of either domestic terrorism, extremism, whatever you want to call it. There are some real threats of that. And, we saw this, just how easy it is to breach the Capitol 2 weeks ago. And I would expect some long-term security changes. Perhaps that fencing stays there for good over at the Capitol, make it look a little bit like the White House. So I think there's still some signs of things to come, even though we don't expect 25,000 troops to stay here long term. Some of them, perhaps, a growing security presence down the road, perhaps, whether it's for this administration or even just in the short term.
Matt, we saw capitals, including ours here in Harrisburg, boarding up, taking steps, having security in place because of possible threats to other government buildings. That's certainly something we've seen after the Murrah Federal Building attack or after 9/11 last for a little while. But let's talk philosophically about the Biden administration. What do you think he needs to do to kind of calm this moment in our country? After Trump was elected, we had the "Not My President" protests. But what does the Biden administration have to do to make the whole country say, yes, this is our president, and to move us all forward, no matter whether we're red or blue or somewhere in between?
Yeah, so I think he struck a good message in the first few minutes that I heard of his speech before we started here on the live stream here, because I think it's an optimistic but realistic tone, and I think that's what needs to be said. As far as something like the pandemic, I think a lot of Americans have finally said, we've been waiting and ready to get serious about this, whether that's getting money to people, whether that's speeding up the vaccination process. I think those are some welcome messages, and I think he's striking those. I also think what we see after today is unpredictable and unwritten, because in the not-too-distant future, we're going to have a Senate impeachment trial, and that's going to be a little out of the president's hands, President Biden's hands. But Senate Democrats now have a responsibility to not inflame the country more than it's going to be, because while we're seeing the calm, the secure procedures here today, that's also why you're probably going to see some sort of continued security presence here in D.C. for the next few weeks, because you have to do that trial pretty soon. And I think with the acknowledgement of some of this radicalism, this extremism by some far-right groups, what's to say that couldn't happen again? It is just a reality, and I think a lot of security officials here in D.C. know that. So the president, to back the long answer to your question, Lisa, to go back to that point, he has to strike the right tone moving forward to really balance both sides of the aisle here in what could be a polarizing time moving forward as well.
All right, Matt, last question for you here. We talked a little bit about what Congress's plans need to be in the next few weeks. How about the president's plan by the end of today? He's expected to sign a flurry of executive orders, make some changes to what the previous administration had done. What's this schedule looking like for the president by the end of the day today and as we move forward into this week?
Well, it's 12:01. He's officially the president, Isaac, and I think that that's a really important note to make, because he does have a pretty long list of executive orders he's ready to sign tonight. The transition team sent us a notice this morning, 15 in all, from what we understand. That's still the case. That includes everything from wearing your mask, the 100-day promise that we heard. Basically, it's a mandate of sorts on federal grounds and an encouragement elsewhere. It's also rejoining the World Health Organization and the Paris Climate Accord and some of those things that President Trump took the U.S. out of. So, some of them are simply striking the Trump administration's executive orders. Some of them are new. And I think that, again, that's pretty much that's kind of a common day one for a lot of presidents. They tend to essentially go back and line item a few of these executive orders from the previous administration. But in this case, President Biden, the Biden administration is inheriting what is kind of a complex situation here because of the polarized nature of this country and actually trying to accomplish some of the what should be some common ground measures, wearing the mask and perhaps controlling climate change and things like that. That's going to be a tough balance for him, but it does start tonight with those executive orders.
Alrighty, Matt. Well, listen, you've been a warrior out there. We appreciate taking a few minutes. We know this presidency is going to last not just today, so make sure to get some rest, and we'll see you back on in a little bit. Lisa and I thank you.
Hey, you got it. We'll see you soon.
Adler, you are clear, sir, as we move back onto the alert desk. Isaac Pekiash, Lisa Adams. That's a good boots on the ground look. And Lisa, as Matt was showing, there is a lot of security. I mean, I know we talk about that. We had mentioned it, the 35,000 plus foot mobiles on the ground. But when you look at this video here that I'm about to play, it's serious. I mean, it is everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's striking. Something that really is not a typical picture of the United States. I have to say, I was in France after the Charlie Hebdo attack, and I was surprised to see that everywhere. You know, see it at the L'Arc de Triomphe, see it when you come up from a metro stop. It's like comforting and scary at the same time. And of course, after 9/11, we had that kind of security in our own airport here. So it's not the only time we've seen it, but it's striking that this is in response to an act that's really being characterized as insurrection or domestic terrorism. Really a sad moment, but also it shows our nation's resolve to make sure that this event, the event of today, the inauguration and the peaceful transition of power, takes place and does so safely. It would have been marred somewhat by COVID-19, not able to be normal, if we know what that is anymore, but certainly this took it to a whole new level.
I find it interesting, one of the things that Matt was saying is that he anticipates that at least these sort of restrictions / enhanced security will be in place for some time afterwards to ensure that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, we saw it here in our capital, and we've seen it across the country in other cities, just taking measures just in case. Prudent, but something in a country that is open, that you can visit the halls of government. It's a people's house, and all of those things. It's sad to see that happen, but at the same time,
ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. and Dr. Jill Biden.
United States, Jill Biden. As well, in something that really has been a long time coming. A lot of people think it's too long. It's been that we've had a woman, and specifically a woman of color, to be in such a high elected position. And a lot of people, I think, Lisa, today may see this as a new era, not just in the presidential cabinet, but in terms of diversity and allowing women of color, and people who in the past may not have been included as much, now a chance to assume power.
Yeah, I was reading in inaugurations in the way in the past, spouses, first ladies didn't even attend. It was all men attending the inaugural event. So obviously that changed in recent years, where first ladies were taking a more important role, holding the Bible when someone was being sworn into office and so on. But today, a very different role when one of the people being sworn in herself, a woman, and as you said, a woman of color. So as Mrs. Dahlkemper said, first on a lot of fronts that make it possible for people to know anybody in this country could be elected, that there aren't barriers there.
There she is, Vice President Kamala Harris, standing right next to the former Vice President Mike Pence, who did attend the inauguration. Former President, now Donald Trump, did not. And it was also interesting to hear the county executive talk about that she believes that the president and the vice president will work in tandem. It's something we didn't necessarily see in the past administration. Mike Pence would, of course, back up his president, but at the same time sometimes would remain quiet, in essence. And that's something that the county executive and I think others expect to be different. We expect more of a pair leadership than a singular leadership.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be a collegial arrangement there. I don't know that much about the inner workings of the Obama-Biden administration. I think there were times that Joe Biden wished he had a bit of a bigger role, but certainly he was always right there and a confidant of the president. So it will be interesting to see how that relationship develops and what kind of responsibilities that the vice president has, Vice President Harris. Obviously, the Trump administration gave a lot of confidence initially to Vice President Pence in handling the COVID-19 crisis and helping to oversee that. But that, that happened in fits and starts. And in one regard, Pence was handling that, but then the president would come in and speak as well. And I think was criticized soundly for contradicting himself sometimes on the advice that he was giving to the country. So that was a challenging role for Mike Pence to do what the president had asked him to do, but then to have sometimes, some contradictions going on between himself, Dr. Fauci, and the president of the United States. I think it will be interesting if Vice President Pence writes a book about his time. We've had a lot of books from people who were perhaps in the Trump administration and left. Everyone has their own perspective, obviously, but he's a person of strong faith. He certainly felt more than elected to that position, but called to that position to be able to be, we have checks and balances in government at every level, but I have a feeling that he saw himself as a check on the president, because clearly he did not always agree with him, but he certainly respectfully stood by him, as would be the role of the vice president. So that line between when you say, I don't think this is a good idea, Mr. President, and when you realize the president is going to go forward and do what he's going to do. So obviously we had heard that relationship was strained in the final days when the vice president said he couldn't do what the president was asking him to do when it came to the Electoral College votes being counted in a rather ceremonial way. And we heard there were a couple of days of no communication between the two of them, something that would have been unusual during the administration. But as the president prepared to get on the plane today and fly to Florida, he certainly did thank the vice president and the second lady, Karen Pence. So that was more than we had heard said in recent days. He also said he wished success to the Biden administration and thought that there would be successes, but he also made the point they'll be building on the foundation that he set during his time in office. We do know the economy was in a really good place until the virus hit. So certainly the president today, in his parting comments, trying to point out what he believed were the accomplishments and achievements of his 4 years in office, but that will always be marred by what happened from the time he did not get reelected until this inauguration day, a very tense moment in our country.
The looming question will be, what if former President Donald Trump had handled the pandemic differently, and what if there was no such thing as a global pandemic in 2020, if we wouldn't be seeing Joe Biden in this spot and Trump getting reelected to that position? And Lisa, to your point, there were also a myriad of reports through the entire administration that the president was very difficult to speak to. It was Trump's way or the highway, to put it into perspective. Something that I think we talked about Biden and Harris working in tandem, but something we expect to be different with this incoming President Biden, especially knowing his experience in D.C.
Yeah, the interesting thing at the last there, where there had been a struggle on the next stimulus package for COVID-19, and, across the aisle, they worked out a deal after a lot of tug and pull, and it was going to be, $600. And the president, comes out and kind of goes against what his own administration had worked toward there. That was kind of a surprising move at the last. And then obviously those special Senate races, I think some people think that he was too involved in that and making that not about those candidates, but a referendum on his presidency, or a referendum on whether you believe the results of the election were accurate or that there was some kind of election fraud.
We're going to go ahead and back in just a minute, bring back in our Jeff Bloodworth as Lisa remains with us. So, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind coming over and getting your microphone on, I'm just going to turn the sound off for just a second. We're going to listen in live here to this report. We'll get the camera set back up, and we'll be all good to go. Give us 1 second, folks.
And that concludes the inauguration ceremony at the Capitol. It looked different than any other, and as we expected, the empty spaces, the social distancing. What we didn't see, except in a few cutaways, I suppose, the soldiers, that ring of steel around this general area owing to what happened.
Alrighty, we are back here on Erie News Now, our live stream of the 2020 inauguration. There is the current Vice President Kamala Harris. The President, Joe Biden, making his rounds as well. They have both officially been sworn in, and we're swearing back in our Jeff Bloodworth from Yale University. Jeff, you had a chance to witness the inauguration yourself. Just obviously the first question, what do you make of it? And just your thoughts on this entire swearing-in ceremony and the culmination to what had to happen before this to make sure that Joe Biden was indeed the president.
Well, the optics are different, but at the same time, it seemed, kind of a back to normal. I mean, after 4 years of President Trump's kind of unconventional theatrics and his unconventional kind of rhetoric, this seemed, this was a decided turn. I was looking at social media, and it's interesting. It's sparking a lot of kind of thoughts and reactions from people on both sides, kind of negative and positive.
I want to ask you, Jeff, and Lisa, I think you could definitely apply a great answer to this question as well. We were talking a little bit earlier just about the fact that Joe Biden has had to have a long, persevering path to get to office. Several years in Congress, he ran for president back in the 20th century, didn't get enough votes to even come out of the primary, but he did work in the Obama administration 8 years ago. And my question to both of you would be, what experience do you think the president can now take from his time in the Obama administration to transfer over to now his administration?
Well, we see what's real about Washington, and then there are so many dramas from Veep to, the West Wing to serious dramas about it. But we all know about, whipping the vote or things that, hey, this bill is really important. How can I, as the president, invite the people of the opposite party into my office and talk this through with them? What can I do to get this through? And I feel like there was a breakdown of that in the Trump years, where there was really an effort to work with both sides of the House or the Senate. So, I don't work there. I don't know what it's really like, but I think we heard a lot about that in the past. How many people are already for this? How many people a president might have to convince? What it would take to convince them? And I feel like we didn't hear that in recent years. I'm sure the professor can tell me whether my perception is accurate or not.
I think you're totally right, but I think it extends even before Donald Trump. I think it extends into the Obama presidency. I mean, this is a theory, right, of, you're testing a case of how do you get significant legislation passed. How do you make Washington work? I mean, Barack Obama passed Obamacare, but largely speaking, Washington didn't work during the Obama years. I mean, there wasn't like a continual kind of legislative process that might have been ugly, but still kind of made the federal government kind of help the trains run on time. And, Joe Biden, this is somebody with deep experience and deep relationships. And this is the theory of the case. Do you have a charismatic outsider who can make speeches and arouse the public that can then kind of make Washington, pass things? Or do you have somebody with relationships and experience who can make Washington work from the inside? And unlike, President Obama had the Great Recession, But by 2010, I mean, that crisis had ebbed. But I think you have even more of a crisis moment, believe it or not, than the Great Recession in 2009. So, there is, I think, more kind of urgency from the public for action.
We're seeing this brief parade now that we talked about before. I believe, I mean, the parade is not going to be what it was before. It's very short. I think that, as you said, down in the Obama years where, we talked a lot about executive orders, I can't get this done, so I'm just going to do it myself kind of a thing. And then, although President Trump campaigned against that, he found himself doing similar things some of the time. So, Joe Biden has the experience to know how it should work. I guess the question is whether he can make that happen, because I think the opposite criticism of that is that Washington listens to itself. It's an echo chamber. It doesn't really understand what's going on across the country and what regular Americans are thinking. And President Trump seemed to tap into the disenfranchisement, if that's a word, that a lot of Americans in an Erie County, Pennsylvania, were thinking, or things that they were frustrated about. So, how does he make sure? I mean, he certainly couldn't conduct a campaign where he really went all the way across the country and listened to people. I'm not sure how much listening happens on a campaign as opposed to pontificating, but how do you think he stays in contact with real people? Do you think he's putting together the kind of cabinet that makes that happen?
His cabinet, I mean, deeply experienced, Obama kind of insiders, and so I don't think these are people that you would say have been working kind of at the grassroots or the state level. How does President Biden stay in touch? I mean, my sense is that he relies upon his personal experience, and that I think he thinks of himself as somebody who his nickname in the Senate was Middle Class Joe. And I think he still thinks of himself that way. It's really hard to stay in touch with kind of Main Street America in the middle of a pandemic. But if there's any president, in the 20th or 21st century who has that kind of innate ability to do so, it's someone like a Joe Biden. I mean, this is the first Democrat who didn't go to a fancy Ivy League school since Lyndon Johnson. I mean, this is somebody who has Main Street in his bones, and it was kind of seemingly from what all observers say, has never left that behind.
Bouncing off of that, a lot of the criticism that came to Joe Biden during the primary when he ran against all of the other candidates was that he wasn't able to win the young vote, the college kid. The people who are just out of college, the ones who might be voting for the first time, they were going for people like Bernie Sanders, for Kamala Harris, for Elizabeth Warren. How was he able in the end to win over those votes, and how much of it was selecting Kamala Harris as his running mate?
The youth vote, I often think this is, the Democrats in terms of the youth vote, this is a dog chasing the car. Is that, in 2008, Barack Obama was able to capture the youth vote and really ride that to a landslide win. I mean, this is Joe Biden. Look, he won the youth vote, but young people did not turn out in unprecedented numbers. Mm-hmm. And he relied upon the Democratic coalition as it was, and that was not ever going to be Joe Biden's race, is to, motivate young people and to get them to the polling place in large numbers.
Yeah, we saw a lot of fear stoked on both sides, really in the last couple of presidential election cycles, where it's less about, here's what I, your candidate, am going to do, and more about, if that person gets elected, all these horrible things are going to happen right now. How can we get past that political moment and get to a place where candidates can tell you more about what they plan to do instead of trying to frighten you about what the other candidate might do? I mean, obviously we're talking about socialism on the one hand, and on the other side, we're going to turn back the lives of women, and we're going to round up all the immigrants and send them out of the country. I mean, those were the polar extremes that we heard.
Yeah, I mean, negative partisanship works. This is why campaigns employ it. I don't know. One hopes that you can get back to kind of normal politics where you're at least arguing about policy. Let's start there. But I think, what you said earlier about kind of the Washington establishment, I think the last 4 years probably should have sent a message to the Mitch McConnells and the Mitt Romneys and the Lisa Murkowskis that it is in their interest to try to work with the Biden administration, not to pass liberal legislation, but to work and to find a compromise. It's in the Biden administration's interest to get Republicans on board. If you get 3 or 4 Republican senators to sign on to kind of key pieces of legislation, that's bipartisanship. I mean, that is Washington working in a way it hasn't worked since early in the Bush administration. Right before 9/11, George W. Bush, whether it was No Child Left Behind, and his faith-based initiatives, I mean, he did have bipartisan congressional majorities passing his domestic legislation. I mean, we haven't seen this in nearly 20 years.
We have this proposed package from the incoming president that's, what, $3 trillion?
It is. I mean, the stimulus bill itself sits at $1.9 trillion. It would be the second largest of the stimulus package. The first one was a little bit over $2 million. Certainly a big haul if you're the president.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that while we want the federal government to help us out of this pandemic situation and how it has decimated the economy, I think there is a tremendous, how do we bounce back from that? Because it's got to be our own money that pays into that system. So I think that's going to be the biggest puzzle here for this administration.
Look, you can't run as the unity candidate and then your first major piece of legislation is passed by Democratic votes only. You just can't do that. And I don't think the Biden administration wants to. They're going to have to get Republican votes. 1.9 trillion. This is an opening bid. Republican senators are going to come back, and we're going to see where they land. Because I can't imagine a scenario in which you don't get 2 or 3 Republican senators signing on to something. Both sides need this. Where in the somewhere between 1 and 2 trillion. I mean, it's that's a heck of a lot of money, but it's also we're in a heck of a spot.
And when it comes to the administration bartering process, what components of the package do you believe they're going to strongly, them being the Biden administration, push for? We saw the Trump administration push, in his words, for those stimulus checks of $600. Then he argued for $2,000. Unemployment insurance was not a big component of the Trump administration in their package. What, in your mind, will be the things that the Democrats will push for and maybe won't budge on as opposed to things they won't push for?
I would say the checks, all right? The checks and the minimum wage. I mean, my understanding is that the Biden administration has decided that ordinary people in Erie County, what they need to show is action, urgent and tangible, something tangible that people can immediately see. And a check in the mail, some sort of kind of graduated but still immediate raise in terms of the minimum wage. I think those are the 2 things that are going to be kind of non-negotiable. Now, whether it's $2,000, whether it's means tested, but I think checks in the mail and minimum wage.
I wonder if you can balance that against, though, getting the vaccine out. Like if you had to say, oh, you're getting a check, you can fix your roof, or you can, buy a new sofa. I mean, for some people, it's a desperate thing. They need that money to live. For some people who've been able to work through the pandemic, they look at that as a little bit differently. So does everybody really need that check in the same way? And could that money be going in a better way toward this vaccine dilemma that we have, where we don't seem to be able to get it out as quickly as we had hoped?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think it's probably bad policy to send out another round of $2,000 checks to everyone that's not means tested. Maybe the final legislation will do so. At the same time, I think you're totally right. I mean, the long-term fix, but both short and long-term, is kind of vaccine delivery and straight. But that's not in the initial legislation. That's just about figuring out kind of the logistics. And I think the Biden people don't know today how bad the logistics are.
Very interesting points you see right here. Former vice president and the current vice president standing on the steps of the Capitol. Normally, it would be the former president and the current president on the steps, but of course, right now, former President Trump is at his Mar-A-Lago resort. You see the laughing and the exchange of words. What those words are, we might not know, but it would be interesting to be a fly on the wall in that conversation here as Vice President Pence gets ready to depart for the final time in the White House, at least under the Trump administration. And with that, we do want to bring back in our Matt Knadler. Matt, if you can hear me, we've got you on here in the double box. I want to ask you a question that Lisa, Jeff Bloodworth, and I have been talking about for the last few minutes here. We know the road for Joe Biden was incredibly difficult. He's ran for president already. He didn't win in his first or second attempt that he had. What do you think he can take from being in the Obama administration into the White House here as he moves forward?
Well, I think experience overall, diplomatic experience for one is a big thing. I mean, when you're the vice president, oftentimes, depending on the administration, but I think in Joe Biden's case before as vice president, he traveled the world a lot. He had some key diplomatic positions, and I think he's taken a lot of that experience, and he'll bring that with him now. On the flip side, you almost have to look at Vice President Kamala Harris, and she is still somewhat new to the national spotlight here, and I think she'll actually she'll be able to learn from Joe Biden, from the president now, some of the ropes that maybe he learned in the Obama administration too. So it's not so much, I think, maybe as a learning moment for him as it is a teaching moment. But it's interesting to look at that, Isaac. I'm glad you guys brought that up, because I think that there are some things that he might have learned, as vice president before. Perhaps the recession and how to manage a crisis that way. We heard that brought up on the campaign trail, and perhaps some tools he can take from that and put it toward the pandemic here. And even though this is a crisis a year in the making, it's not something he necessarily got thrown into like he did last time in 08-09. But, managing what was in a national crisis before and now an international pandemic, I think that kind of, talk about cutting your teeth and learning on the fly. I think now President Biden got a pretty good experience doing that, and now can transition that from his past life to his new job.
Matt, we saw that moment there just a few seconds ago with Vice President Kamala Harris face-to-face on the steps there with outgoing Vice President Mike Pence. Talk a little bit about, during your short time in Washington, there's been so many changes in the Trump administration, people that came in and lasted, a week, a month, 2 weeks. But of course, Vice President Pence is elected. He wasn't really going anywhere. But any sense of how he maintained a relationship with President Trump throughout this whole time, and what's his legacy as he walks away?
Good question, Lisa. I mean, I think we've always kind of known Vice President Pence to be more of a statesman out of the two, between President Trump and the Vice President. He was much more of a statesman. And I think the relationship moving forward between the Biden administration, the White House, and officials on Capitol Hill with Vice President Pence might be good. I think he does have some political ambitions of his own in 2024 or beyond, depending on what he wants to do. So I think he knows that this is not only a good moment for democracy, an important moment to be here today to greet President Biden and Vice President Harris, but to actually extend that relationship to Capitol Hill as well. Now you have a Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, coming in. Those three senators, by the way, the two Georgia senators, those two Democrats, and Kamala Harris's successor in California, Alex Padilla, they're going to be sworn in this afternoon. So, you're kind of in the minority now for Republicans, and I think Vice President Pence, by coming here today, it's a true statesman, like we saw President Obama back and some other folks here today. But it's also moving forward how important it is to keep those relationships. And some Republicans I've talked to, and I'll kind of localize this for a quick second. We've talked to Glenn Thompson over the last couple of weeks, the last week in particular, and he's going to be the top Republican on the House Agriculture Committee, the ranking member. And so, not only is that big for Pennsylvania, but to get anything done in this upcoming Congress for Republicans, whether you're outgoing, incoming, still here, you need to have a good relationship with Democrats. You need to be able to, get your voice heard, because for the next 2 years, you could be at the kids' table, so to speak. You need to be able to have that good relationship. So from Vice President Pence down, I think a lot of Republicans are trying to extend that olive branch, even after the last 2 weeks and everything we've endured.
Yeah, Matt, the myriad of relationships that will need to be built are important. We're going to let you go here, but again, we appreciate you taking some time as we continue on Inauguration Day, and certainly the question becomes, can the Biden administration make that work? Matt, thanks again.
You got it.
All right, you're clear, Matt. You are good to go. We're going to bring it back in here on the alert desk. Guys at Petcash, Lisa Adams, and Jeff Bloodworth here joining. In about 10 minutes, we're going to be live on WSEE for Erie News Now at 1 o'clock today. Bit of a special edition as we get ready to continue our coverage here on Inauguration Day. Let's go ahead and bring back up this picture. I believe we have former President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton speaking there. You can see them moving up the steps as the processional continues, and still a lot left to be done here on this Wednesday, despite the inauguration being done.
I should have asked this of Matt while we still had him there, but I think I can ask Dr. Bloodworth about it. But President Donald Trump had a very unusual relationship with the news media, with the press. And so talk a little bit about that. I mean, he certainly was a person, seemed to have sort of a love-hate relationship with media. What do you think the Biden administration will be like? What do you think his rapport will be like with reporters? Do you think it might go back to some sense of normalcy? I mean, there was a time that reporters felt a little scared, I think, during the 2016 campaign when he would turn the cameras on the platform at the back and go, all you people, the reporters. And, usually we're just kind of minding our own business back there trying to objectively report on a campaign stop. So that was really unprecedented, I think, although I know there's a book out about the relationship with presidents and the media through the decades. I gave it to my husband for Christmas. We haven't read it yet. But so what do you think the Biden administration's rapport will be like with reporters from what you've seen in his political career up to this point?
Well, I mean, there's a famous clip of Joe Biden, more than one, getting testy with reporters. I mean, he famously has this Irish temper. And so I 5 years of being literally identified as enemy of the people, I think there's going to be a lot of relief, and I think a natural human reaction, at least in the first days and weeks of the Biden administration, is going to be one of sort of, of a honeymoon. But I suspect by February, if not sooner, these are professionals. I mean, they're going to go after the president, and they're going to go after his policies, as well they should. And I think within, a couple of weeks, we're going to see a White House press corps in a socially distanced manner, shouting questions, having, testy exchanges, as it should be. But, I just think it's going to look remarkably normal.
It's interesting, too, because when you think of the Trump administration, you think, of course, Trump continuously called out the media, but the media was really Trump's best friend in the fact that it allowed him to be able to get what he wanted to say. We saw more press appearances by him or his press secretary, like Kayleigh McEnany was the one who was last there as the press secretary. We saw more than really any other president. Do you expect the same number of appearances for the media from Joe Biden, or do you expect it to be maybe scaled back a little bit and more of a planned, strategic sort of a press appearance scheduled each day?
Oh, I think it's going to be remarkably, strategically different. He's going to have members of his cabinet speaking on behalf of particular policies. He's not the charismatic gadfly that the president is, and that's just not who Joe Biden is. That's not his strength. He has an enormously competent, deeply experienced cabinet. He's going to, I think you were saying earlier, Vice President Harris is going to be a very able kind of stand-in. And so when Joe Biden, can speak to the moment, they will have him do so. but he's
I,
not
Joseph
going to be
Robinette
the
Biden Jr., do
constant,
solemnly
ongoing
swear
center of the national attention the way President Trump was.
that I will
And I think there's
execute
a large majority of Americans who
the
are
office
going
of
to
President
appreciate
of
that.
the United States.
I mean, Joe Biden is going to be judged
and
on
will,
the
to the
COVID
best of my
vaccine
ability,
rollout and the resulting economic
preserve,
rebound.
protect,
And I think
defend,
everybody in the Biden administration knows that. And so trying to dominate media attention is just not his DNA.
God.
Really quickly,
Congratulations, Mr. President.
The question is now that getting much further off the distance, and I just look at my inauguration day, how important is handling the COVID vaccine for Joe Biden for his reelection?
My sense is that President Trump kind of actually COVID played somewhat to his benefit because he portrayed Democrats as the party of the lockdown. And what Democrats cannot, if they want to be politically successful, they cannot be the party of the lockdown. They have to be the party of the safe and reasonable opening up of the economy. Everything is on this vaccine rollout. If people can go to baseball games and sort of like not the same numbers we used to by July, that's everything. That's everything. The Democrats desperately need to be the party of opening up, not the party of lockdowns. And I think there's going to be more than amount of kind of patience, in the next few months. But that patience is going to run out by the summertime if people aren't seeing tangible differences in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, as long as it's by the end of July, because I have a wedding I have to plan. But regardless, that's still a long time away, and today's January 20th. You see on the right-hand side there the caravan as President Biden and Senator Harris, or rather Vice President Harris, get set to depart toward the White House. They will be participating in several amount of ceremonies, including signing, I believe Matt Knadler said, 15 different executive orders, 2 of which are in terms of the vaccine. A mask mandate is going to be one of them. Rejoining the World Health Organization, the Paris Climate Accord is what they plan on rejoining. A lot of these executive orders, as Matt said, almost a reversal of what we've seen with the Trump organization making that decision. But again, a pretty stark contrast into what we saw President Trump did on his inauguration day, whereas the Biden administration, at least for the moment, let's get to work.
Yeah, lifting the Muslim travel ban, I believe, is another one of those 15. So, right move on his part to sign all those things, or do you think? And then, of course, we've got the impeachment trial that is also on the horizon here too. And I think there were certainly some eloquent arguments on both sides of whether that was the tact to take, and whether any president would want to get his administration started with people still looking backwards at the last administration.
He had to sign. Look, these executive orders are things that he campaigned upon, right? I mean, there's no secrets here. Liberal groups are totally expecting them. I would just say, your story about having a wedding, every family has a story, It's all about the vaccine rollout. My own mother, we're waiting to move her back home until, we're waiting for the vaccine. Everything is about rolling up your sleeves, getting to work, and seeing progress in the vaccine. The executive orders, are superfluous, especially during the age of COVID. If in the next few months, if people can see kind of some sort of tangible movement, people can plan weddings, if parents get the vaccine. That's what this presidency is premised upon.
Just getting a look at what we have here throughout the day. We're getting our producer Alex has been running back and forth through the studio, and we appreciate him for that, giving us excerpts of the inauguration. I'm sorry, Lisa? Go ahead. Tell that to me off the mic here. You're good.
Okay. What are you doing now?
We're about to go live at noon. I believe we have a hit at 1:09 is our time for Erie News Now at 1. So we're getting prepared for that. We're also getting prepared for continuing coverage here of the inauguration. We're live on Facebook. We're live on ENN+. Myself, Lisa Adams, Jeff Bloodworth, we've been with you. We're going to keep this coverage going until about 1:30, and then for Erie News Now at 5, we'll bring you continuing coverage. So still a lot going on, and you can see here right now former presidents, President Bush, the second to final Republican president since Donald Trump. That, of course, was a major transition when President Obama took office. So, Jeff, here's my question now, as I'm seeing President Bush get into the vehicle here. There's so much interest, especially in the last 2 to 3 decades, of the complete opposite president taking office. We saw it where it was Clinton in the 90s. In the 21st century, you have President Bush, a Republican, to President Obama, a Democrat, to Trump, a Republican, to Biden, a Democrat. What does that speak to in your mind about the difference that we have in this country, whereas it seems like the same party can't keep it together for more than 2 terms?
Well, it's not just the White House. Since the early 90s, either the House or the Senate have changed hands 8 times. I mean, it is the nearest precedent for this is the Gilded Age, where neither party could become the majority party and create an enduring coalition that would win election after election. And so during these times where both parties are evenly divided and both parties have the chance to gain Congress or the White House, what you see are bare-knuckled politics, and you get divisive, hyper-partisan elections. And, you know, I would argue that the way to tone down the partisanship is that you need one party that can win consistently. And you saw this in the 1980s when Ronald Reagan was winning 60% of the vote. Democrats started voting for many of his proposals, and they started mimicking many of his kind of ideas, not completely, but in some significant ways. And one party or the other needs to be to gather a clear, enduring majority and to win and control Congress through the elections. That's going to drag their opposite party back into the center.
I think Joe Biden kind of campaigned in a way saying, come on, man, we're not as far apart as you might think. So is that the message that he needs to carry here to try to work in that center space?
Yeah, I mean, what Joe Biden needs to be, it seems to me, is culturally traditional, right? Fiscally moderate. And you can't have a Democratic Party that only wins in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. No. It's not to say that Democrats are going to dominate Crawford County. But it can't be 75-25. And heck, 20 years ago, those were Democratic areas. It wasn't that long ago that Democrats were at least competitive. So yeah, I mean, it's Biden and the Democrats, no longer scaring, right, and antagonizing kind of rural white voters and trying to find what is that special sauce. I mean, or Republicans being able to move into the cities and not only just recapture the suburbs, but also to appeal to, the emerging, ethnic and racial minorities in America.
You talked about the importance of his speech and his voice to Americans. We actually have a bit of an excerpt right now from his inaugural speech. We were talking with County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper when that happened. Let's play a bit of that for you right now.
I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all are created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial, and victory is never assured. Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us have come together to carry all of us forward. And we can do that now. History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces Stop the shouting and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge. And unity is the path forward.
Unity, lower the temperature, and join voices. That's the message by President Joe Biden. He was speaking in part to the racial injustice in the country, but also a message to the country that we need to come together, a similar message we heard President Barack Obama speak in his 2008 inauguration. And that poses the question, Jeff, we talked about it earlier, how does that happen? How do you, as a sitting president in day one moving forward, make sure that you do what you need to do to make sure that you preach that unity?
I mean, I think you lead by doing. And the rhetoric is nice, but we send people to Washington to also pass legislation. And so what you have to have is big pieces of legislation that attract bipartisan votes. And in this impeachment, whatever they do, what it surely can't be is just Democrats. If Republican leadership is saying we don't want this, it seems to me that Democrats might be wise to really think carefully about the next steps. I mean, the insurrection was terrible as it was. I mean, you can actually make situations worse. So I would, it's getting Republicans, working with Republicans, even if it's 3 or 4 Republican senators. I mean, in what we've seen in the last 15 years, I mean, that's called bipartisanship these days.
So there were 10 Republican lawmakers who chose not to accept the Electoral College vote. Some people are saying, oh, the Republican Party is in very big trouble here. But what's your thought on that? Do you think that moment at the Capitol on the 6th of January, this moment today where the new president is calling for unity, what do you think the status of the Republican Party is within its own ranks?
I think some of that is going to be premised upon the investigation, right? I mean, there's been some really serious, but as of yet, kind of, they're just charges that there might have been Republican members of Congress implicated. Let's see how deep this goes, and will the insurrection fade from memory as President Trump's, right? Something that he was solely the progenitor of, or will there be members of Republicans in the Congress who are going to be found to be implicated in that. So, it'll be interesting to see, the Republican Party, are they going to make a clean break with President Trump? And if so, that could cause an inter-party civil war that could, push some Republicans to work with Biden.
It was interesting today to hear the president wishing the incoming administration well, something I think people had been waiting to hear him say for weeks. And also, we do know that he wrote a note to the president, which is a traditional thing, something I've heard people say he was quite touched by President Obama leaving him a note. President Trump was a writer. I mean, I understand he wrote notes to people all the time. He clipped articles, he wrote a personal note, mailed things to people. I mean, people of all walks of life. We know him most for his tweeting, but I do know that he wrote personal notes to people. So do you have any speculation about what might have been in that note from the outgoing president to the incoming president?
I have absolutely no clue. It's interesting. Was President Trump the author of the note, or was this staff, right? I mean, there's always 2 President Trumps. There's the one where they put him in front of the lectern and he reads from a prepared statement that was written by someone not him. And so, look, he's capable. We've seen him be funny, right? I mean, there are moments in which you could actually, like, he has been graceful. Not many times, right? But, I mean, he's capable of that.
To your point, I heard the national media today saying that they were given the text of the speech that he was going to give before he got on the plane, but he said something else that wasn't what they had. So, I mean, I don't know if there was any overlap there, but, an interesting moment.
It's an improvisational White House, for better and for worse. I think you can look back 20 years from now. We can look at President Trump, and if you're trying to find what were the positives out of the Trump presidency, he did turn everything on its head, and maybe there's some old kind of orthodoxies that needed to go to the wayside, and it'll be up to the Biden presidency to kind of figure out, what are those things they're going to keep. And what are some of the tired kind of, expectations that needed to go that we're going to leave behind?
You and I talked about earlier, Jeff, about the potential for members of the Trump cabinet or Trump or Pence himself to run again for office. And I'm curious to know, somebody that I talk to on a regular basis that I deal with in politics was talking to me, and he said, the banning of Trump's Twitter account actually might be a good thing for him moving forward, might be able to paint him in a better light if he's able to get back to normal civilianness, if that's even a word, and get back to the normal everyday life of what he is. And we saw Mike Pence at the inauguration ceremony as well. We don't know whether these two are going to run again. You've mentioned you don't think that's a possibility, but just for Trump and Pence, the outgoing presidents and vice president, what's their next step forward, whether they want to remain in politics or just want to be maybe painted in a better light by those that looked at them as total darkness for the last 4 years?
For President Trump, I think relevance is what he wants. And it's interesting, if you ever talked to any of Trump's supporters, what's one of the first things they would say is, I wish he would get off Twitter. Right? And so that's interesting, that it could actually be redound to his benefit. I think he's going to try to engage in the media, start his own media company, or at the very least be a star in a media company. What Pence does, I suspect Pence is going to be extraordinarily quiet. He might do some fundraisers behind the scenes. If he has ideas about 2024, he's going to be on the campaign trail raising money for people in 2022. But I think he's going to go away and be very quiet for a while. That just seems to be his kind of MO. And Trump is going to be the opposite.
Big questions ahead, and of course an incoming administration with President Biden right now. We've just gotten a word that we will be delayed for Erie News Now at 1 is now going to become Erie News Now at 1:30. That is our start time. So what we'll do is we'll be on the alert desk here until about 1:29. Then we'll get off of Facebook, ENN Plus, and make way for Erie News Now at 1:30 as we continue our Inauguration Day coverage. As we continue along, Jeff Bloodworth, Lisa Adams, just a lot to get to, a lot still to happen throughout the day. And I just think a day that we were talking to the county executive earlier, Jeff, and I want to ask this question to you. I asked her, between the people that you've talked to, do they consider this day a new beginning or the end of an era? Which one do they think is more applicable to this day? And I'm wondering what your thoughts are of the people that you talk to, maybe the students that you teach, whether they believe that this day was more so of the end to one man's reign or the beginning to another chapter.
I think for my students, they see this as an end, right? They don't see President Biden as an inspirational figure in the same way that maybe they saw Bernie Sanders or Barack Obama, or for those students who like Donald Trump. I see that they see it as an end, and I honestly think that they're wrong about that. I think the Biden presidency is actually a beginning, and ending a really ugly chapter that really started with the Clinton era and finally concluded with the Trump era of a Washington that was just gridlocked with the basest kind of partisanship that we've seen before in American life, but we had not seen it in the post-World War II era. It was very American, but it was also very ugly. And very frustrating for a lot of voters. I mean, that's my hopeful spin, is that I think the Biden era is going to be one of sort of a Washington that works.
Good point. Lisa, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I think I'm still thinking about all the people that still voted for Donald Trump and how divided we still are, how divided, as Mrs. Dahlkemper also said, we're a divided county, we're a divided state, and we're a divided nation. So I think the, national media came here for weeks and months after the 2016 election to say, why did you guys flip from blue to red? I don't know if as many will ask why we went from red to blue. this time around. But I think that if voters looked at the platform more than the person, because some people weren't enchanted with Joe Biden and some people weren't enchanted with Donald Trump, but if they were looking more at that platform of, you know, smaller government, bigger government, raising my taxes, not raising my taxes, you know, all of those kinds of things. I mean, there were a lot of people who said, I don't really love Donald Trump, but I'm afraid of the other ideas. So, you know, as some said, you know, I held my nose and voted for Donald Trump. So I think that's the question is, you know, we see the Trump supporters that charged the Capitol, but of all the other people in the nation who voted for Trump this last time around, they weren't all charging the Capitol. So, you know, how do we find where the real thinking is in the nation, and then that unity that the president is talking about?
Yeah, I'm related to lots of Republicans. I'm friends with lots of Republicans. Not one of them were in the Capitol. None of them have kind of defended the insurrection. That's not the vast majority of the Republican Party. But it's as you say. Lots of Republicans, they would say, I don't like his tweeting. You know, I wish he wouldn't do X, Y, and Z. But it was a fear of Democratic overreach. And I mean, this is what we've seen, is that both parties, when they have a victory, they will get full of themselves and they will go too far and antagonize core voters in the other party. And one would think that for a Biden administration to begin, look, we don't want to heal all breaches partisan entirely. I mean, part of the American political tradition is some really sharp conflicts. That's a healthy thing. But what you need, I think, is a Biden administration that can have a $1.9 trillion stimulus package. And in order to get they could pass it through reconciliation without a Republican vote. But I strongly suspect they absolutely don't want to do that. They have to have Republican votes. If you can get 5 or 6 Republican votes, you know, are Republicans going to love the bill? Probably not. But, you know, you're going to, I think, begin to lower the temperature just a little bit.
Some of the big arguments, I think, on the Republican Party side had to do with flaws in Obamacare, but we hear a lot less about that. You know, the idea that it's, however bumpy the rollout of it was, it's here now. So trying to completely repeal and replace that, I think, even went out of the Republican talking points. But talk a little bit about things like the tax cut package that the Trump administration was able to get through, and talk about the opportunity zones that are something that are important to development going on here in Erie County, or the work of the EDDC, which certainly Gannon has been a partner in downtown as well. So, I mean, do you think we'll see a pushback, a rollback of any of those kinds of things? Or do you think there will be a measured view of, here were some good things that came out of the Trump administration that we're going to let roll forward?
Yeah, I would think as far as tax cuts, if Democrats are going to roll some tax cuts back, it's about, you know, where that threshold is. Are they going to raise, you know, corporate tax rates significantly? And that's not what President Biden ran on. It was about raising taxes on the very, very wealthy. But on certain Republican policies that, you know, are workable and have kind of local and statewide support, you know, I don't think the Biden administration is looking to pick any fights. That, you know, that just doesn't seem to be the tone of President Biden. I mean, you know, Nancy Pelosi has the reputation as a San Francisco liberal. I think you understand Nancy Pelosi better by seeing that she was the daughter of a Baltimore mayor, right? I mean, this is somebody that they understand kind of the give and take of politics, and the fact that Nancy Pelosi is trying to help Connor Lamb, right, the Democratic representative just to our south, in a Trump district, win re-election. And so they're going to try to steer, I think, a moderately liberal path. And they're going to be, I think, very different from the Clinton and Obama administrations, which began with kind of Democratic-only votes on high kind of ticket items. I don't think that if they take that path, that's the path to losing the House in 2 years and losing control of the agenda.
One of the things we haven't talked about yet is foreign policy. We've talked about domestic policy, what the stimulus package will entail, how you work with Republicans, but one of the concerns I think many Republicans had with Joe Biden coming into office is his ability to work with foreign leaders. It was something people also had a concern with Donald Trump when he came into office. We know in places in the Middle East, North Korea planning another test of ballistic missiles in the next couple of days here. How do you surmise Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and that administration will go about dealing with foreign policy, knowing the not non-collusion, but the dissonance that we have between other countries, especially ones that could potentially be on track to do some damage in other places if we don't get things sorted out?
This is about repairing, our decades-old relationships, whether it's NATO and our relationships with Japan and South Korea. I mean, this is going to be, and again, he has Tony Blinken, a longtime aide, who's going to be his Secretary of State. I mean, that's job one, is to repair these relationships with our allies and alliances across the world. Mm-hmm. And I think he's quite well positioned to do so, and he's put people in place to kind of deal with that so he can concentrate on domestic policy.
A lot of things to consider, too, when it comes to foreign leaders, and we know specifically the big question I think that you have to look at is, when it comes to the pandemic, rejoining the World Health Organization. Talk a little bit about how important of a task that was for Biden, and if you think it will help, hurt, or remain indifferent when it comes to the U.S.
In the short term, the effects for rolling out the vaccine really don't matter that much. It's really about the medium and long term. What we hope is that this will be a pandemic that we're not going to experience for the next 50 years. But being part of the World Health Organization and cooperating with our allies, I mean, what the Trump administration did is they decided in the early stages of the pandemic was to create their own testing regimen rather than rely upon what the WHO had already created, which put us months behind in terms of being able to test on a large scale. That's largely why we had to, the shutdown lasted for as long as it did. So this is, rejoining the WHO is not going to materially change our day-to-day lives, the plans for your wedding, my mom getting the vaccine. But, it's about a year from now, 3 years from now. Will there be pandemics in the future? Yes. Climate change tells us that threats such as this loom ever larger, in our lives. But what we can do is make the effects less profound. I mean, if there would have been better global integration and cooperation, we could have maybe contained COVID to Wuhan, right? I mean, this could have been a problem that we were worried about, but it was not necessarily have to be the cataclysmic international event that it became.
They take a look at Joe Biden right now in office, I believe, signing some executive orders, signing his first documents as the current president of the United States. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in the background, Kamala Harris, the vice president, to his right. You see Amy Klobuchar, who a lot of people thought was the front runner for his vice presidential candidate when he announced he would be picking a woman. Ended up being Kamala Harris. You also see Senate Majority Leader, as of today, Chuck Schumer, who is in the background on the left-hand side. I believe that's Mitch McConnell on the right-hand side, the Senate Minority Leader, unless that's somebody else that I'm missing. No, that's not Mitch McConnell. That is somebody else, but McConnell is surely in the area, so signing his first documents. We said the first executive order rejoining the World Health Organization, Paris Climate Accord, issuing a mask mandate. And Jeff, that's where I want to focus right now. If you're a Republican, one of your fears with Joe Biden entering office could have been he's going to institute another lockdown. He's going to bring it back to where we were in March. He's going to institute all the policies that left us economically disenfranchised in 2020. Do you anticipate that, knowing that there are other nations right now that have gone back to national lockdowns, the UK in particular is one of them? Do you anticipate Joe Biden pulling the trigger and going back to a national shutdown like we saw back in March?
Well, first, he lacks the power to do so. Second, we understand so much more about this virus than we did last spring. I don't anticipate another lockdown. I could anticipate in Pennsylvania, perhaps the governor would, have restaurants and gyms closed for a temporary basis. We're not Western Europe. We're not South Korea. Americans and our sense of individualism and sense of kind of freedom mitigate against kind of those kinds of lockdowns. We have someone at Gannon who is French, and she just returned from Paris over Christmas break, and she was telling me that they have to be home by 6 p.m. And that's just not part of the American experience. So I don't anticipate a lockdown. The president doesn't have the power to do so. Maybe you could imagine maybe something in California where things have gotten kind of bad that could possibly happen. But we're gonna be dealing with this in a state by state, in a regional way. Like for instance, the mask mandate is for federal properties, federal employees, federal places only. They don't apply outside of that.
Bringing back in there, Lisa Adams. We got about 3 minutes left to go here on the alert desk. So, Lisa, I'll leave it to you with final questions as we wrap up our Inauguration Day coverage here.
Well, I'm kind of wondering about what students think. I mean, I have adult children of my own, and they really have grown up in this very divided era. Politics was fun. It's been a little bit less fun lately, and certainly I think it was actually horrifying to see that attack on the Capitol. And so, what do you tell your students, or what do they think about how polarized we are? Because it certainly, I think it started with the 2000 election, the dispute there, of the results of that, the hanging chads. And I think, frankly, there were a lot of bumpy things about voting this time around, even if you accept the results of the election. Certainly in Pennsylvania, it was rather chaotic here, how the rules were kind of changing as they went along, partly because of the pandemic, partly because of a new voting system, and so on.
Yeah, I suppose if I were 20, I'd be really mad at me. In our generation, like, what is it that you've given us? Look, I taught a class on the history of presidential elections in the fall. My students in class, we disagreed agreeably, but there was a lot of frustration with the presidential candidates, the choices that they had, the reality of COVID that they live in, and I could imagine there's just a lot of frustration of like, this isn't fun. But I think they also, I know at Gannon, students, unfortunately, because they understood that there was this divide between Trump and Biden people, that they negotiated that by talking about other things, which is civil, and that's a good thing. But to me, as a political historian, it makes me sad that, in order to get along and to live amongst one another, that you avoid the topic entirely. And I think it's smartly, and my understanding on campus, that we negotiated that quite well and civilly. But that's a lot of how students in their day-to-day lives did it.
And it's interesting, too, and I guess I'll speak to this because I am a college student who graduated in December, and I was on campus, and I understand kind of how this works. I think there was, as you mentioned, not just a divide and not wanting to communicate, but there was also a fear of making the other side upset with you, making it so that you felt like you were isolated, so that you could only talk to the people that were in front of you. And to your point, I would argue the biggest thing that a college student is upset with is the fact that there is this prerogative, that there needs to be a division, so much so that if you speak your mind to somebody who disagrees with you, that's a negative thing. And I think that might be where we have to get back to, that, as we wrap this up here, that we might have to get back to the fact that open conversation is a good thing.
Yeah, open conversation is really a good thing. And I've been surprised to hear some Democrats in my social circles talking about longing for John McCain, longing for George Bush, people that they wouldn't have said that about a number of years ago, but actually hoping for, it's kind of like Browns fans or Steelers fans hoping the Bills win out of a graciousness. But I mean, I've heard some people saying, I sure hope the Republican Party gets it together. And I sure hope that what we saw in Washington in terms of that violent attack isn't what most of the people in the party think. And, you know, again, longing for the statesman-like nature of some of these people who came before, who I think at the time were called dumb and various other things. So, I mean, certainly they're like taking the temperature of what people think now is different than then.
And that will be up to the Biden administration, who starts their work today. You saw the executive orders being passed, and we're getting set to see what happens in the Biden-Harris administration. That's going to do it for us here on the Alert Desk, ENN Plus, and Facebook. We're going to be over on Erie News Now at noon, which is actually at 1:30 in just a moment. Thanks for listening to our Inauguration Day coverage. For